Chapter 1. In the middle of a vast mountain range, two sword-shaped peaks stood 100 meters apart from each other under the sea of clouds. These two sword-shaped peaks were very steep and looked like two magnified swords inserted into the ground. There was no place to climb. The top of these two sword-shaped peaks was less than 100 meters away from the sea of clouds. At the top of the peaks, there was a faint mist lingering around. Under the cover of the mist, the scenery at the top of the peaks was blurry and hazy. However, one could still vaguely see that at the top of the two sword-shaped peaks, there were two people standing there quietly like stone statues. They were motionless, and only the wind in the sky blew their clothes and hair. Among the two, one of them looked like a young man in his 20s. The young man was very handsome. His handsome facial features were flawless and could be said to be unparalleled in the world. He was simply the killer of all the young girls in the world. His pair of ordinary eyes had a unique attraction. It was very charming, as if it could capture one's soul. The young man had long black hair that reached his waist. His long hair was not tied and was casually draped behind his back. It fluttered with the whistling wind. On the young man's back, there was a long sword wrapped in a thick layer of white cloth. Only the exquisite sword hilt could be seen. On the sword hilt, the two words Qing Feng were clearly engraved. But what was strange was that the sword was not tied to the young man's back. It was as if the sword was attached to the young man's back and did not fall off. This scene was very difficult to understand. The young man's name was Jianqin, and he was the most famous expert in the Jianghu. He was also known as the Sword God, a grandmaster of the sword. His swift sword had already reached perfection, and he had reached the peak of perfection. However, he was only in his 20s. The people of Jianghu knew very little about Jianqin. Other than knowing that he was an orphan and did not belong to any sect, they knew nothing about him. His origin was like a ball of mystery. No one knew where he learned his powerful martial arts and exquisite swordsmanship. On the sword-shaped peak 100 meters away from Jianqin, a tall man in a black robe stood facing him. He was an old man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s. He had white hair and a youthful complexion. His pair of old eyes were bright and piercing. His gaze was as sharp as a sword, and no one dared to look him in the eye. In his hand was a thick black great sword. Strangely, the great sword did not have an edge. This old man was a legendary figure who had disappeared from Jianghu for more than 100 years, Dugu Qiubai. Dugu Qiubai was only his title. No one knew his real name and identity. This was because he was already an invincible super expert 100 years ago. There were very few people who still knew some information about Dugu Qiubai in the world. Even so, his incomparable glory was still passed down from generation to generation. 100 years later, his strength was even greater than before. No one knew how strong Dugu Qiubai was now. Dugu Qiubai silently stared at Jianqin, who seemed to be in his 20s 100 meters away. His gaze was extremely sharp as a blade. A cold glint flashed through his eyes from time to time. Jianqin, you're no weaker than the old man at such a young age. Your attainments in the way of the sword have reached a height that even the old man cannot compare to. It's a pity that you killed my only beloved disciple. I have to avenge him today, no matter what, Dugu Qiubai said solemnly. Dugu Qiubai said in a deep voice. His seemingly calm tone was filled with a chilling, killing intent. Jianqin's expression was extremely calm as he stared at Dugu Qiubai. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and his waist-length hair danced wildly in the wind. He looked very dashing. You can't blame me for this. It was your disciple who offended me first. As for dying to my sword, he can only blame himself for not being skilled enough. Jianqin's lips parted slightly as he nonchalantly said. Dugu Qiubai was so angry that he laughed. Good. What a not skilled enough. Let's see how strong you are today. Let's see if you can kill the old man with that breeze sword of yours. As he said that, Dugu Qiubai waved the black iron heavy sword in his hand. Suddenly, a powerful sword chi shot out from the sword and shot towards Genshin, who was 100 meters away. Genshin's expression was calm. Following the sound of a sword being unsheathed, the long sword on his back appeared in Genshin's hand. The sword was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide, and it emitted a silver-white glow. Following that, Genshin stabbed out with the long sword in his hand. A powerful sword chi shot out from the sword at a speed that could not be seen with the naked eye. Boom! When the 2 sword chis collided, a deafening boom rang out. The powerful true energy shockwaves spread out in all directions from the point of explosion, dispersing the faint mist that lingered in the surroundings. Following that, Genshin and Dugu Chobai flew up at the same time, leaving the mountain they were standing on. They flew between 2 mountains and engaged in an intense battle in midair. The 2 of them attacked at an incredibly fast speed, and the clashing and scraping sounds of weapons rang out ceaselessly in the air. Strong sword beams shot out from the 2 of them in a disorderly manner, creating large holes on the surrounding mountains and sending countless rocks down to the ground, thousands of zhang below. In just a few breaths' time, Genshin and Dugu Chobai had exchanged hundreds of blows. When they landed on the 2 mountains again, both of them were in a sorry state. Their previously intact clothes were torn and tattered. Dugu Chobai looked at Genshin with a serious expression. He said in a deep voice, "What a fast sword. No wonder no one in the Jianghu can break your fast sword technique. But you still can't do anything to old man." Dugu Chobai paused for a moment before continuing. "It'll be hard to determine the winner if we continue fighting like this. Why don't we use our strongest attacks at the same time? We'll decide the winner in one move." With that, Dugu Chobai's chi suddenly soared. It was like a huge sword piercing through the clouds. Genshin's expression became serious. Following that, he also released an extremely powerful chi that was no weaker than Dugu Chobai's. Their auras continued to rise, blotting out the sky and filling up the entire sky. When their auras combined, they enveloped the entire mountain for thousands of li. Even the clouds in the sky were pierced by their auras and quickly dissipated. Fierce winds howled in the sky, producing ear-piercing cries of ghosts and howls of wolves. Within the mountain forest, countless birds and beasts cried out in fear. They quickly fled into the distance. Meanwhile, the auras of the 2 men on the mountain peak continued to grow stronger. They were preparing for their strongest attack. Crack! Crack! In the forest not far away, many small trees could not withstand the powerful chi of the 2 people and snapped at the waist. They were then sent flying into the sky by the powerful chi of the 2 people. As Genshin and Dugu Chobai's chi continued to soar, a powerful chi appeared around their bodies. It spun rapidly around the 2 of them. The flowers and trees were bent under the pressure of the chi of the 2 people. Countless trees swayed unsteadily. At the same time, Genshin's light wind sword and Dugu Chobai's dark iron-heavy sword were both emitting a dazzling white light and a dark black light. The chi of the 2 people became stronger and stronger. In the end, Genshin's entire body was covered in a thick layer of white light, while Dugu Chobai was covered in a layer of black light. The 2 people's figures were completely lost. Only 2 balls of dazzling light of opposite colors could be seen in the sky. Ing! The long sword in Genshin's hand trembled lightly. At this moment, the long sword was shining with a dazzling sword light. The powerful sword chi was enough to make one's heart tremble. His long black hair danced wildly in the wind. His white robe also fluttered in the wind. His entire body was suspended in the air. He looked like a god of war, mighty and undefeatable. When their imposing auras rose to the peak, both of them suddenly let out a furious roar that shook the heavens at the same time. Their voices shook the heavens, and it was like a deafening clap of thunder. After that, a gorgeous white light and an extremely dark black light collided with each other at the speed of lightning, and they passed each other in an instant. There was no sound of collision as expected. When everything calmed down, Jianqin and Duguchobai had already switched places. They were now standing 100 meters apart on top of two mountains. Both of their faces were extremely pale. Fresh blood quickly flowed out of Jianqin's chest, dyeing his white robe red. When the two of them passed each other at lightning speed, Duguchobai's sword had already pierced through his heart. As for Jianqin, he had already lost his entire right arm. Without his right arm, he no longer had the strength to hold his sword. The dark iron-heavy sword in his right hand had already fallen down the cliff. When he pierced through Jianqin's heart, he also lost an arm. Jianqin quietly stood on top of the mountain. A trace of blood slowly flowed out of his mouth. His complexion became paler and paler. In just a short moment, he was as pale as a sheet of paper. His heart was pierced through by Duguchobai's sword. He was in a hopeless situation where death was certain. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, Duguchobai burst into laughter on the opposite mountain. Jianqin, with your talent, given a few more years, old man would definitely be no match for you. What a pity, even though you aren't much weaker than the old man right now. You still lost to him in the end. Having said that, Duguchobai sighed. It's indeed a pity that a genius of a generation will die in the hands of the old man. However, the old man had no choice but to do this in order to avenge his disciple. Jianqin slowly closed his eyes as he sensed his life slipping away. He seemed very calm at this moment. Perhaps life and death didn't matter much to him. After all, Jianqin had killed many people during his years of wandering the world. His only regret was that he wouldn't have the chance to explore the pinnacle of the Tao of the sword in the future. While Jianqin was immersed in this emotionless state, a strange feeling suddenly appeared in his mind. At this crucial moment, Jianqin's soul seemed to have fused with the sword in his hand. He was the sword, and the sword was him. There was no distinction between him and the sword. It was as if the sword in his hand had become a part of his soul. At the same time, strands of pure and powerful worldly energy descended from the heaven and earth. They flowed into Jianqin's head and perfectly fused with his soul. Jianqin could clearly feel his soul growing at an unbelievable speed. At the same time, his soul seemed to have left his body and flown into the endless wilderness. At this moment, Jianqin could see everything within 10 miles clearly in his mind. He could even sense the movements of the mosquitoes on the ground. Chapter 2. Suddenly, the long sword in Jianqin's hand broke, free from Jianqin's control. At this moment, the long sword seemed to have become a sentient, immortal sword. It turned into a beam of light and shot toward Duguchobai, who was 100 meters away at lightning speed. The long sword was incredibly fast. Before Duguchobai could react, the long sword had already reached his throat. Then, with a strong sword aura, it pierced through his throat under Duguchobai's horrified gaze. Afterward, the long sword circled around in the air and flew back to Jianqin's hand. A fist-sized hole appeared on Duguchobai's throat. Even though Jianqin's long sword was very thin, the sword aura around it still expanded the wound to the size of a fist. Duguchobai's eyes widened as he stared at the long sword that had returned to Jianqin's hand. His face was filled with disbelief, as if he had seen the most unbelievable thing in the world. He opened his mouth slightly, as if he wanted to say something. Unfortunately, his throat had been pierced, and he could no longer speak. In the end, he slowly fell to the ground with a face full of unwillingness and shock. Jianqin held the long sword in his hand as he silently watched Duguchobai fall to the ground before him. He sighed inwardly. He did not expect that he would make another breakthrough at the last moment and reach the realm of wielding a sword with his spirit. However, he was not far from death now. Jianqin's eyes gradually dimmed. Even though he had made another breakthrough, he could not escape death. After all, his heart had been pierced through by Duguchobai's sword. Then Jianqin followed in Duguchobai's footsteps and slowly fell to the ground. The moment Jianqin collapsed, the two sword-shaped mountains that he and Duguchobai stood on suddenly exploded. Countless rocks shot out in all directions as violet and azure light filled the sky, illuminating the surroundings. At that moment, the entire sky was filled with violet and azure light. Unfortunately, Jian Chen and Duga Qiubai had no way of knowing what happened next. In a spacious and luxurious mansion, there was a large group of people gathered in front of a door. The person in front was a young man. He paced back and forth in front of the door. There was an indescribable anxiety and worry on his face. The young man was around 30 years old. He had a dignified appearance. Although he was nearing middle age, he still couldn't hide the handsomeness on his face. He wore a white robe embroidered with golden silk. He had the aura of a superior person. His face was resolute, and his eyebrows were tightly furrowed into a ball. 3 meters away from the door, there was a group of about 30 people standing there with worried expressions. There were both young and old among them. The older ones seemed to be in their 60s or 70s. They had a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles. Even so, their eyes flickered with a frightening light. From the light in their eyes, one would think that they were not old men at all. Instead, they were strong and vigorous middle-aged men. Most of the others were middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. They all had imposing appearances and sharp eyes. One could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary people. In the room opposite them, the painful moans of a woman could be heard constantly. "Madam, push harder, push harder. She's going to come out soon. She's going to come out soon." A rather urgent voice soon rang out. The voice was rather old. One could tell with a single sound that the owner of the voice was not young and was a woman. Outside the door, the middle-aged man who was anxiously pacing back and forth in front of the door suddenly stopped. He anxiously said, "Say, it's been an entire day and night. Why hasn't Yin been born yet? If this drags on, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to Yin." The young man's voice was filled with worry. He was clearly very worried. "Patriarch, don't worry. Madame Yin will definitely be fine. Don't forget that Madame Yin is a radiant Saint Master." An old man with a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles persuaded. Although his tone was filled with confidence, he still could not hide the worry on his face. "Sai." The white-robed young man with the temperament of a superior heaved a heavy sigh again. The anxiety and worry on his face did not lessen in the slightest. Afterwards, the group of people waited outside the room for over 4 hours. Finally, an excited voice rang out from the room. "Patriarch, Patriarch, Madame Yin has given birth. Madame Yin has given birth. The mother and child are safe. It's a boy." The voice was filled with excitement. Hearing this, the worried look on the face of the young man who was waiting anxiously outside the door was finally swept away. Instead, it was replaced by a face full of excitement and excitement. Then, without saying anything, he directly pushed open the door and disappeared in a flash. His speed was really unbelievably fast. It was definitely not an ability that an ordinary person could have. The young man immediately arrived before a large bed in the room. He sat beside the bed and stared at the woman on the bed in concern. He said, "Yin, how are you? Are you fine?" His voice was gentle and filled with concern. The one lying on the bed was a young woman in her 20s. She was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a nation. She was simply a heavenly beauty. Her beautiful face was already dripping with fragrant sweat. Her complexion was slightly pale, and she looked exhausted. The woman looked at the young man with exhaustion. She smiled and said, "Husband, I'm fine. Let me see our child." All right, all right, all right. As long as Yin is fine." The young man smiled happily. He then turned to look at the midwife who was holding the child. Just as he was about to speak, he noticed that the midwife's brows were tightly knitted together. She stared strangely at the baby in his arms. She fiddled with the baby as she muttered, "Cry, cry. Child, why aren't you crying? That's strange. I've been a midwife for so long, and I've given birth to at least a few hundred, if not 1,000. This is the first time I've seen a child who hasn't cried as soon as he was born." At this time, the group of people outside also entered the room. Each of them had a smile on their faces as they congratulated the woman lying on the bed. The middle-aged man smiled happily and gently said to the woman on the bed, "You ne'er lie down for a while. I'll bring the child over." Then the young man got up and walked over to the midwife. He asked, "What's going on? Is there something wrong with the child?" The young man's voice sank slightly. Some children would be born with an innate emergency. This was a very common occurrence, and it had happened quite a few times. He was really afraid that something had happened to his child. Hearing this, the midwife looked bitter. She looked at the young man and said respectfully, "Master, I don't know if there's anything wrong with the young master. However, based on my decades of experience in midwifery, every child cries as soon as they're born. However, your young master's situation is a little different. Look, he hasn't cried at all as soon as he was born. This is very strange." Hearing this, the young man frowned and looked at the baby in the midwife's arms. He saw that the baby's large, bright, and pure eyes were looking around. He would stare here and there for a moment. He was very adorable. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with him. However, he did not notice that in the depths of the baby's bright and clear eyes, there was deep shock and disbelief. Afterwards, the young man placed his hand on the baby, and a hazy, earthen yellow light suddenly appeared on his hand. The midwife became slightly uneasy when she saw the young man's actions. She was only a lowly midwife, someone who lived at the bottom of society. She really was afraid that there was something wrong with the baby in her arms. Otherwise, if the young man blamed her, she would not be able to bear the consequences. Even though this matter had nothing to do with her, she had no ability to explain herself. The young man pulled his hand back very quickly and finally relaxed. He smiled happily and said, "The child is fine. There's nothing wrong with him at all." With that, the young man took the baby from the midwife. The midwife immediately let out a sigh of relief when she heard that. She finally relaxed and smiled happily. "Master's right. Perhaps this represents the young master's extraordinariness. The young master will definitely become a supreme expert in the future." The young man could not help but laugh aloud when he heard the midwife's words, even though he knew that the chances were extremely slim. He said, Good. Let's hope that's the case. Someone, tip Mother Hong 100 gold coins." The midwife was overjoyed when she heard that. She immediately said excitedly, "Thank you for your reward, master. Thank you for your reward." The young man carried the baby over to the woman on the bed and said happily, "You look, this is our child. He's so cute." The woman called Yin, hugged the baby, and kissed his cheek affectionately. She said happily, "Husband, since the child is a boy, let's call him Chanyang Shoten according to our previous agreement." The young man laughed aloud. "That's right. I'll officially call him Chanyang Shoten now. Someone, invite all the esteemed guests in Lore City. I'll hold a banquet in Chanyang Prefecture tomorrow to celebrate." In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. In front of a small lake in a large courtyard, a boy less than a meter tall stood there in a daze. His eyes stared at the fake mountain in the center of the lake in a daze. The boy wore luxurious clothes, and his expression was extremely complicated. For a boy less than 3 years old to have such an expression, he seemed rather out of the ordinary. Chapter 3. Chanyang Shoten looked at his small body and sighed inside. His face was filled with mixed feelings. In the past year, who knew how many times these scenes had appeared in his head? Now that he thought about it, it felt like it had just happened yesterday. The memories were so clear, as if they had been deeply imprinted in the depths of his soul. He could not forget them no matter what. Now he understood that his past life was Jianshin. After his death, he had mysteriously reincarnated with his soul and memories. As Jianshin had retained the memories of his past life as soon as he was born, he learned the language of this place soon after he was born. Afterwards, he gained a rough understanding of what kind of existence his family was from the conversations of the people around him. At the same time, he also gained a rough understanding that this world was not the world he had originally lived in, but a completely new world. It was a world that Jianqin had never heard of before. The huge estate that Jianqin resided in was called Changyang Prefecture. Changyang Prefecture was one of the 4 great clans of Lore City. It held an important position in the entire city. His father was the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. His mother was called Bai Yuntian. She was the 4th concubine of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. She was not the main wife. However, his mother's status in Changyang Prefecture was not low because she was a Radiant Saint Master. Although Jianqin did not know what a Radiant Saint Master was, he did know that his mother's status in Changyang Prefecture was extremely high because of her identity as a Radiant Saint Master. She was respected by many people. Jianqin himself was the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture. He possessed an extremely high status. Above Jianqin, there were 2 older brothers and 1 older sister. They were Changyang Hu, Changyang Mingyue, and Changyang Ku. They were all born of the same father as Jianqin. Apart from Changyang Hu, Jianqin had seen his sister Changyang Mingyue and his 3rd brother Changyang Ku a few times. They were all only a few years older than Jianqin. His 2nd sister, who was the oldest, just happened to be 4 years old, 3 years older than Jianqin. His 3rd brother, Changyang Ku, was 2 years older than Jianqin. He just happened to be 3 years old this year. Apart from them, there were many children who were direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. At this moment, an old man dressed as a caretaker arrived behind Jianqin. He said with a rather gentle voice, "4th young master, it's getting late. Madam wants you to return." Only with that did Jianqin return to his senses. Looking at the sky, he suddenly discovered that it was already misty. It was a sign that night was about to arrive. Unknowingly, Jianqin had already stood there for an entire afternoon. Jianqin nodded slightly, "I understand. Changbo, I'll return immediately." The person Jianqin called Changbo was the caretaker of Changyang Prefecture. Almost everything in Changyang Prefecture was taken care of by him. His status in Changyang Prefecture was not low. Even though Changbo was only a caretaker, he did not show any respect to anyone in Changyang Prefecture. His status was basically on the same level as Changyang Ba, the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. A smile appeared on Changbo's face. He looked at Jianqin with a glimmer of hope. Jianqin was able to walk on the ground without the support of others when he was less than half a year old. He could even speak in the 8th month. Moreover, his pronunciation was clear. He was already able to communicate normally with others. Just based on these 2 points, Jianqin was already vaguely known as a genius in Changyang Prefecture. At present, he had already become the person with the highest status in the middle stage of Changyang Prefecture. At night, Jianqin accompanied his mother, Bai Yuntian, to the dining hall for dinner. The dining hall they used was a special one. Only the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture, his children, and a few concubines could use it. When Jianqin and Bai Yuntian arrived at the dining hall, there were already 3 beautiful women in their 20s sitting at the round table. Aside from them, there were 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, who did not look much older than Jianqin. The boy looked to be around 3 or 4 years old. He was white and chubby. At the moment, he was sitting quietly on the bench. He was the 3rd son of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture, as well as the 3rd young master of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ku. As soon as he saw Jianqin enter, Changyang Ku's small eyes were filled with hostility and provocation. It was very obvious that he had some prejudice against Jianqin. Although the 4 women, including Jianqin's mother, could see the hostility in Changyang Ku's eyes towards Jianqin, the 4 of them did not care. In their eyes, this was just a child's play. It was not a big deal at all. The other little girl looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. She had 2 small braids on her head, and her bright eyes were filled with a strange spirit. She had 2 small dimples on her shallow smile, and she looked very cute. Just from her appearance when she was young, it was almost certain that when she grew up, she would definitely be a great beauty with a face that could cause the downfall of a city or country. She was the second child of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. At the same time, she was the second young miss of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Mingyue. She was the only daughter of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. Fourth brother, you've come. Come sit. Changyang Mingyue's faint smile became even brighter when she saw Jianqin enter. She quickly waved her hand and greeted him. Jianqin nodded at Changyang Mingyue as a greeting. He then followed his mother to the 2 empty seats at the round table. Jianqin's mother, Bai Yuntian, looked at Jianqin dotingly and said softly, Xiang, quickly greet your aunts, second sister, and third brother. Jianqin was helpless. He looked at the delicate women and said, Greetings first aunts, second aunts, third aunts, second sister, and third brother. Ever since she found out that Jianqin had learned how to speak, his mother, Bai Yuntian, had been overjoyed. She had also dragged Jianqin to learn some basic etiquette. Jianqin, on the other hand, did not resist his mother's suggestion. He also knew that he would grow up in this new world in the future. When he first arrived here, Jianqin had an intense struggle over his identity. After all, he had reincarnated from his previous life. Since he had retained the memories of his previous life, he was still Jianqin. As for his current identity, Jianqin had rejected it a little. However, as time passed, he gradually accepted his current identity. No matter what, Bai Yuntian was still his mother. Although he had mysteriously retained the memories of his previous life after his death, those memories had occurred in another world. They had nothing to do with this world. Now, Jianqin had hidden his past deep in his mind. He planned to accept everything here with an open heart. The 3 women smiled at Jianqin. One of them, who was dressed in luxurious yellow clothes, smiled and said, Sister Yin, Xiangtian is becoming more and more sensible. Sigh, it's really hard to imagine that he's just a 1-year-old child. I really envy you for having such a smart son. The woman in luxurious yellow clothes was the second wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. She was Bai Yushuang, Changyang Mingyue's mother. That's right, Sister Yin. Second sister is right. I found that I like Xiangtian more and more. The woman sitting beside Jianqin also smiled. Although she said that, her gaze towards Jianqin was calm. She was the third wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Yu Fengyan. Xiangtian is indeed the most talented child I've ever seen. He could walk by himself when he was half a year old, and he could speak when he was 8 months old. This is something that no other child of his age can do. I really look forward to the test of Saint Force and potential when Xiangtian turns 3. I hope that he can give us all a surprise then. The woman who spoke was slightly older. She gave off a noble aura. She was the first wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture. Her name was Linglong. As soon as Linglong finished speaking, a deep male voice suddenly rang out. That's right. I also look forward to the test of Saint Force when Xiang turns 3. I hope that he can give us all a surprise. With that, a young man who was close to 30 walked into the dining hall. The young man gave off an aura of superiority. He wore a white robe with golden edges, and his long black hair casually draped over his shoulders. He gave off a very ethereal feeling. Husband, father. As soon as they saw the young man, the 7 people sitting at the dining table stood up at the same time and greeted him. Jianqin was no exception as he greeted him softly. This young man was the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. Changyang Ba went straight to an empty seat at the dining table and sat down. With a gentle smile on his face, he looked at Jianqin and said softly, Xiang are you happy in the residence? Jianqin nodded slightly and said, Not bad. Changyang Ba continued with a smile on his face, Xiang, if you feel bored in the residence, you can go out and relax. You can also see the outside world. Yes, father, Jianqin said softly. Seeing that Jianqin was so sensible, not at all like a 1-year-old child. Changyangba felt an indescribable joy in his heart. The family had a joyous dinner, and the meal was quickly finished. After the meal, Jianchen returned to his room alone. According to his age, he should have slept with his mother by Yuntian, but Jianchen took the initiative to ask for a room to himself. Regarding this issue, Jianchen was very firm. In the end, his mother could not persuade him and could only helplessly agree. At night, Jianchen sat cross-legged on his bed. His hands were steadily placed on his knees with his palms facing the sky. He was silently practicing the first level of the Azulite Sword Codex. The Azulite Sword Codex was the greatest bargaining chip that allowed Jianchen to roam the Jianghu at the young age of 20. This was a secret cultivation technique. Not only did it record a very profound mental cultivation technique, it also contained some powerful sword moves. This Azulite Sword Codex was discovered when Jianchen was playing in the mountains. He accidentally fell into a pool of water below a cliff and did not die. After waking up, he found it in a cave. Afterwards, he ate fish every day. After 10 years, Jianchen was able to fly up from the bottom of the cliff and return to the surface. Jianchen was originally an orphan. His parents had both died during the war. When he was young, he was adopted by a kind old man. When he left the cliff, 10 years had already passed. When he returned to the small village, his adoptive grandfather had already passed away many years ago. In the end, Jianchen, who had no one to rely on, paid his respects to his adoptive grandfather and left the small village to roam the Jianghu alone. Ever since Jianchen accepted this world and his current identity, he began to practice the Azulite Sword Codex. He had already been practicing for half a year now. Chapter 4. The Azulite Sword Codex had a total of 12 levels, one of which was to refine the body. In order to have powerful martial arts, one must first have a strong body. After all martial arts relied on the body to perform. Therefore, the first level of the Azulite Sword Codex was to refine the body. Most of the martial artists in Jianghu relied on training and doing some forced movements to strengthen their physique. Some people even had large, bulging muscles, making the muscles all over their body clear and visible to the naked eye. Some people's bodies were even as hard as steel and iron. In Jianchen's opinion, this kind of physical training method was no different from destroying one's own body. It was simply suppressing one's body function. Although this would make one's physical strength far beyond that of ordinary people, it would also cause great harm to one's body. This kind of person's lifespan was often very short, especially when they entered the old age. A series of problems would appear on their body. Among the martial artists in the Jianghu, there were some people and sects that had their own methods of tempering the body. However, in Jianchen's opinion, these methods were all unorthodox. They didn't walk the correct path at all. Even the Shaolin temple's tendon-changing scripture was no exception. Although the I Ching scripture was a dual cultivation of both internal and external, it could train one's inner strength internally and externally. It could train one's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones externally. However, the information recorded in the I Ching scripture about training one's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones had yet to go deep into the bone marrow. In Jianchen's opinion, the I Ching scripture could only train the skin, flesh, and bones on the surface of the human body. It did not achieve the true effect of training one's body at all. The body refining method recorded in the Azulite Sword Codex was a very profound and mysterious method. It focused on absorbing the qi of heaven and earth and then transforming it into the bone marrow of the body. This would strengthen every part of the body, every cell, and even the internal organs and organs of the body. Not only would this have a very good body refining effect, it would also bring endless benefits to the body. It could greatly extend one's lifespan. Moreover, in the later stages of the cultivation, one's body would become stronger along with their inner strength. The Azulite Sword Codex also indicated that if one could cultivate the body refining method to the highest level, they could even live as long as the heavens and earth. However, the the body refining method was related to one's own strength. Only when one's inner chi was stronger could one's body become stronger. After all, the body refining method recorded in the Azilit Sword Codex required one's inner chi to be integrated into the body. Once the inner chi and the strength of the body reached a balance, one would have to break this balance as quickly as possible and work hard to increase the strength of the inner chi. Only then would one's body be strengthened one step further. The chi of heaven and earth was endlessly absorbed by Jianshin. It circulated through the meridians in his body according to a specific cycle. Then, under Jianshin's control, it was integrated into every cell and internal organ in his body. Ever since he came to this foreign world, the only thing that made Jianshin excited was the chi of heaven and earth here. The chi of heaven and earth here was extremely dense, more than 100 times denser than the world he had lived in before. Compared to this place, the world he had lived in before was undoubtedly a poor and destitute place. It was like heaven and hell. The two could not be compared at all. This was the only thing that made Jianshin happy. However, what made Jianshin puzzled was that the chi of heaven and earth in this world was roughly the same as the chi of heaven and earth in his previous life. However, Jianshin carefully discovered that the chi of heaven and earth in this world had a special energy. This energy only took up a small portion of the chi of heaven and earth, and it was closely connected to the chi of heaven and earth. It was as if the two were one and could not be separated. When this energy was absorbed into his body, it did not cause any discomfort. Therefore, Jianshin did not exclude this special energy that was obviously different from the chi of heaven and earth. However, Jianshin was extremely curious about this energy as well. A thought constantly circled through his head, which was that this energy was definitely not as simple as it seemed. As the converted chi of heaven and earth continuously integrated into his body, Jianshin also very clearly felt that every cell in his body, as well as the 8 extraordinary meridians and internal organs in his body, were constantly strengthening. This converted chi of heaven and earth was like a great tonic for them. They all seemed to have come alive and were desperately absorbing the chi of heaven and earth, like hungry tigers. At the same time, Jianshin also felt extremely comfortable from head to toe. There was an indescribable feeling of comfort that made him feel as if he was floating. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. Now, Jianshin had been in this foreign world for 2 whole years. In these 2 years, Jianshin did not take a single step out of Chanyang Prefecture. He spent all his free time in his room, cultivating the first level of the Azilit Sword Mantra, body refinement. Perhaps it was because the chi of heaven and earth here was 100 times denser than the world of his previous life. But Jianshin had achieved great results in the past year. Now, Jianshin did not doubt that a normal weapon in the hands of an ordinary person would not be able to harm him at all. It would not even be able to pierce through the outermost layer of his skin. Of course, this was only Jianshin's feeling. He would not foolishly try it out just because of this. In this year, Jianshin's body had also developed at an unbelievable speed. He was only 2 years old, but he was already one. 2 meters tall. He did not look like a 2-year-old child at all. Instead, he looked more like a 5 or 6-year-old child. This scene made everyone in Chanyang Prefecture very surprised. Almost everyone had high hopes for Jianshin. They hoped that he was really a genius with limitless potential. However, all of this could only be confirmed when he was 3 years old. Regarding all of this, Jianshin felt very helpless. He did not know if his body grew so fast because he cultivated the body refining technique of the Azilit Sword Codex. This was because in his previous life he had not come into contact with the Azilit Sword Codex at this age. After Jianshin accompanied his mother to the dining hall for dinner, he still habitually locked himself in his room. He locked the door and sat cross-legged on the bed. His hands were on his knees and his eyes were closed. He was in a posture of facing the sky. However, at this time, Jianshin was not cultivating. Instead, he was thinking. He had already been in this world for 2 years. In these 2 years, Jianqin had not taken a single step out of Chanyang Prefecture. He spent most of his time cultivating in his room. Until now, his understanding of this world was still too little. It could be said that other than Chanyang Prefecture, he did not know what kind of world this was. He did not even know what the outside world was like. He was also very clear in his heart that he was only a 2-year-old child in the eyes of others. A 2-year-old child would usually be happily in the arms of their parents. They would grow up without any worries. They would not be able to come into contact with such matters. After closing his eyes and thinking for a while on the bed, Jianqin finally decided to wait until the next day to ask his mother. He felt that he needed to know what kind of world this was. After thinking through this point, Jianqin slowly opened his eyes and got off the bed. Tonight, he did not sit on the bed to cultivate as usual. Instead, he stood straight in the middle of the room with his eyes slightly closed. In Jianqin's mind, a set of very profound footwork gradually appeared. Then, a scene suddenly appeared in Jianqin's mind. The scene was like a movie that constantly flowed. He saw a young man wearing a white robe and carrying a long sword on his back, using profound footwork. The young man's speed was very fast. If it was a normal person, they would not be able to see the young man's figure clearly. This was because the young man's speed was just too fast. Although he was only moving in a small space, there was a series of faint afterimages behind him. This young man was Jianqin's previous life. This set of footwork was recorded in the Azulit sword manual. It was very profound. When the moonlight from the horizon shone into the room through the cracks in the window, Jianqin, who was standing in the middle of the room, suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, he finally moved. His legs were moving at an unbelievable speed, almost forming a series of afterimages. Even some people who had practiced martial arts would not be able to maintain such a high speed with their legs. Jianqin's legs carried a profound and rhythmic path as he constantly stepped on the ground. As he moved at high speed, his body also moved at an extremely fast speed through the room. His speed was so fast that it created a whirlwind in the room. However, this scene did not last for very long. Jianqin quickly stopped. At this moment, his face was slightly pale and he was panting slightly. His legs could not help but tremble slightly. Jianqin slowly walked to the window and sat down. He bent down and used his hands to massage his legs. The profound footwork only lasted for a short while. Jianqin's legs were incomparably soft, and he felt as if he could no longer exert any strength. Jianqin helplessly shook his head. No matter what kind of martial arts one practiced, the first thing one needed to do was to train their muscles and bones. This saying was indeed true. The more profound the martial arts, the higher the requirements. Just like the set of steps he had just performed, if he didn't have a strong body and powerful jinqi to support it, he wouldn't have been able to maintain it for long. After all, a normal body wouldn't be able to display such speed, and once the speed exceeded the body's limits, it would cause some damage to the body. It was not that easy to train a profound martial art. Jianqin sat on the edge of the bed and stretched his legs. After his legs returned to normal, he sat cross-legged on the bed and once again entered the state of absorbing the heaven and earth spiritual qi to refine his body. The night passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the sky was already bright. At this time, a voice came from outside Jianqin's room. "Fourth young master, it's daybreak. It's time to get up." Listening to the voice, it was obviously a girl's voice. Hearing this, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. He used a childish voice and said, "I know, Sister Honghua. I'm already up." Saying this, Jianqin got up from the bed. Chapter 5. Sister Honghua, Sister Dongmei, thank you for your hard work, Jianqin said softly as he looked at the two girls who were about 18 years old. The two girls were maids in Chanyang Prefecture. They were dedicated to serving Jianqin's daily affairs. After Jianqin lived alone in a room, his mother, by Yuntian, specially sent these two maids to serve Jianchen. Hearing Jianchen's words, the two maids smiled sweetly. One of them said, "Fourth young master, you don't have to be so polite. As maids, this is what we should do." "That's right, fourth young master. You can't say that in the future. If the steward hears you, we'll be severely punished," another maid said. Jianchen smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't say this in front of outsiders." Jianchen also understood that the concept of hierarchy in Changyang Prefecture was very strong. As the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture, if this sentence was heard by outsiders, the two maids might really be punished. After washing up, Jianchen left his room and walked to his mother's room as usual. His mother's room was not far from his, only a short distance of more than 20 meters. As soon as he entered the room, Jianchen saw his mother dressing up at the dressing table. Beside her, there were two maids waiting on her. "Xiang, why are you here so early today?" As soon as she saw Jianchen, Bai Yuntian's face showed a gentle smile. She looked at Jianchen with doting eyes. Looking at the doting look in Bai Yuntian's eyes, Jianchen's heart completely softened. In his previous life, Jianchen lost his parents when he was young. He didn't know what a mother's love was and had never experienced it. However, since he came here, he truly felt the power of a mother's love. At the same time, in Jianchen's heart, he faintly cherished this hard-won mother's love. Jianchen came to Bai Yuntian and reached out to touch his stomach. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "I'm hungry." After last night's exercise, Jianchen's stomach was now a little hungry. Bai Yuntian reached out to touch Jianchen's head and said with a smile, "Then come with me to the dining hall to eat later." "Okay." Jianchen nodded slightly, a look of satisfaction on his face. In his heart, he enjoyed this mother's love. After a pause, Jianchen opened his mouth again and called, "Mother!" Bai Yuntian looked at Jianchen with a gentle gaze and said softly, "Xiang, if you have something to say, just say it." Jianchen hesitated for a moment and sorted out the thoughts in his mind. Then he looked at Bai Yuntian and said, "Mother, can you tell me what the outside world is like?" Hearing this, Bai Yuntian was obviously stunned. Then she said, "Xiang, are you interested in the outside world?" "I'm just curious," Jianchen said. Bai Yuntian smiled slightly and said, "Xiang, the outside world is very vast and very complicated. It can't be explained in a few words. If you want to know what the outside world is like, it's best to go to the library and read some books." Saying this, Bai Yuntian looked helpless and said, "But Xiang, you don't know how to read. Even if you go to the library, you won't be able to recognize a single word written in the books." "Mother, then why don't you send someone to teach me how to read?" Jianchen's tone was faintly a little dissatisfied. Hearing this, Bai Yuntian laughed and said, "Xiang, you're only 2 years old now. A 2-year-old child starting to learn how to read. Mother has never heard of this matter. Moreover, in our Tianyuan continent, such a thing has never happened. Generally speaking, even the earliest children who start to learn how to read have to wait until they are 4 or 5 years old." Jianchen suddenly understood and said, "Mother, I want to learn how to read now. Can you find someone to teach me?" Hearing this, Bai Yuntian suddenly froze for a moment. Then she revealed a happy smile and said, "Xiang, learning how to read is a very difficult thing. It's also very boring. You should know that there are many languages on our continent. It's impossible to learn all of them in a short time. Are you sure you want to start learning how to read now?" Jianchen nodded affirmatively and said, "Yes." Receiving Jianchen's affirmation, the smile on Bai Yuntian's face became even more brilliant. She happily said, "Since Xiang took the initiative to ask, then Mother will support you very much." Saying this, Bai Yuntian slightly turned her head and said, "Xiao Lu. Later, go invite the most famous teacher in Lore City to the mansion. Let him teach me, Xiang, how to read." "Yes, madam." The maid who was helping Bai Yuntian comb her hair respectfully replied, Xiang, it's getting late. Let's go to the dining hall. Don't starve yourself. The day quickly passed by. Early the next morning, the teacher that Jianshin's mother, Bai Yuntian, invited for him came to the mansion early and began to teach Jianshin knowledge. From then on, Jianshin spent almost all of his time during the day seriously learning how to read. Because Jianshin retained the memories of his previous life, his mind was strong. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for him to recognize the words of this new continent. Especially under the careful guidance of someone, it became even easier. Moreover, he had an almost photographic memory, so his learning progress was very fast. In just 3 months, he had completely learned all of the common words of the continent. The speed at which Jianshin learned the language made the teacher sigh in amazement. When his mother, Bai Yuntian, found out that Jianshin had actually managed to learn the language in a short 3 months, she couldn't believe it. In the end, she had to personally test herself before she accepted this fact. After all, if one wanted to learn all the common languages on the continent, according to the normal speed, it would take at least 1 or 2 years or even more. Yet, Jianshin had managed to complete the homework that would take others 1 or 2 years to complete in a short 3 months. Without a genius's intelligence, it was simply impossible to accomplish this. This matter was quickly found out by Jianshin's father, Changyangba. Changyangba even personally came to Jianshin's room to visit him. Xiang, you have worked hard during this period of time. Next, you should relax. Father can also give you a reward. As the reward for your hard work in learning these few months, I don't know what reward Xiang I would like. Changyangba looked at Jianshin with a smile and said softly, having such a genius son, he felt very proud in his heart. Naturally, he was more concerned about Jianshin. Hearing this, Jianshin's eyes lit up. Without hesitation, he opened his mouth and said, Father, why don't you let me go to the library to read some books? At the same time, I can also increase my knowledge. Changyangba's eyes lit up. Looking at Jianshin's eyes with a trace of gratification, he laughed and said, Of course, this is not a problem. Xiang, you have such a motivated heart. Father is also happy for you. Now, I approve. You can freely enter the library in the future. Thank you, Father. Jianshin's face also showed a trace of a happy smile. Being able to enter the library for Jianshin was also a matter worth being happy about. After all, during this period of time, he slowly understood that the book collection pavilion wasn't a place that anyone could casually enter. Only direct descendants who were 6 years old and above had the qualifications to enter. Of course, if they had the permission of the patriarch, then it didn't count. After that, Changyangba asked about Jianshin's well-being and left here. When Changyangba left, Jianshin could not sit still. He immediately went out of the room and walked towards the library. After all, in these 3 months, he worked hard to learn how to read. Everything was just to be able to enter the library to read detailed books about this world. Although there was some information about this world, Jianshin could also ask his mother. After all, the records in books were more detailed and comprehensive. Therefore, Jianshin valued these books so much. Jianshin had already inquired about the location of the library. It was in a tall tower in the family's backyard. When Jianshin stepped into the backyard, he immediately felt that there were a large number of experts hidden in the surroundings. Pairs of eyes like poisonous snakes fell on him one after another. Jianshin held his head high and walked towards the tall tower in front of him as if he did not feel anything. If people knew that he could feel the gazes of those hidden in the dark, he was afraid that it would immediately bring him a series of troubles. After all, his current appearance was only that of a 2-year-old child, and he did not know the slightest bit of martial arts. Although there were many direct descendants in Changyang Prefecture, there were very few people coming and going to the library. Therefore, Jianshin did not see anyone else along the way except for a few guards in charge of standing guard. Soon, he arrived at the sect of the tall tower. Jianshin stopped and raised his head slightly. He saw that there was a very large plaque hanging on the entrance of the tower. On it, there were 3 large words written in bold calligraphy: Library. In front of the entrance, there were 2 guards guarding. However, Jianchen could tell that these guards were not weak at a glance. Jianchen walked straight to the entrance of the tower. He pushed the door open and directly walked in. The 2 guards standing guard at the entrance did not stop him. They were like wooden carvings, standing there straight and motionless. When they saw Jianchen, they did not even greet him. When Jianchen entered the tower, he was greeted by a long corridor. At this moment, it was clearly daytime outside and the sun was shining brightly. However, in the corridor, it was incomparably dark. On the walls on both sides of the corridor, there were fist-sized luminous pearls hanging at intervals to provide light. This corridor was very long. It was estimated that it ran through the entire tower and divided the tower into 2 areas. When Jianchen came to the end of the corridor, he encountered 2 forks. "Fourth young master, the family head has ordered that you have the authority to enter the left area." At this moment, an old voice sounded. Following the voice, a tall figure gradually emerged from the darkness. Hearing the voice, Jianchen subconsciously turned his head to look. Although the light here was very dim, he could clearly see the appearance of the person in the darkness. He saw that it was a very old man with a head full of white hair. His old face was covered with wrinkles. He wore an old gray robe and his eyes were ordinary. He gave people the impression that he was a very ordinary old man. Chapter 6. Although Jianchen had sensed the old man's strength, he did not reveal anything on his face. He silently nodded and gently acknowledged the old man's words. Afterward, he passed by the old man and made his way to the corridor on the left. When he arrived at the end of the corridor, the light before Jianchen's eyes suddenly brightened. He had already arrived in an extremely spacious room. The light there was extremely bright, no different from the daytime outside. There were many neatly arranged bookshelves in the room. A large number of books were placed on them. If all the books in the room were added together, there would probably be over 1,000 books. Jianchen raised his head slightly to look at the ceiling. He knew that the reason why the light was so bright was all because of the ceiling. He did not know what the ceiling was made of, but it actually gave off a gentle light. Although the light was intense, it was not blinding. Although he was extremely curious about the ceiling, Jianchen did not waste any time on it. He directly arrived beside a bookshelf and carefully selected a book. In the end, he took out the book he needed the most and began to read it. The book clearly recorded the description of the entire continent. It was not thick, so Jianchen finished reading it in 6 hours. At the same time, he gained a rough understanding of this foreign world. This continent was known as the Tianyuan continent. It was extremely vast and contained countless countries of various sizes. Within the territories of these countries, there was a large number of people. There were all kinds of cities of different sizes. The largest of these cities were called super main cities. Each of these super main cities was very large, and the highest ruler of these cities was the city lord. They had millions or even tens of millions of city guards. However, there were only a total of 7 capital cities on the Tianyuan continent. They were controlled by the 3 most powerful empires. The Karl Empire and the Felicity Empire each controlled 2 capital cities, while the Holy Emperor Empire controlled 3 capital cities. Below the super main cities were the royal cities. However, royal cities were much smaller than super main cities, and they were much more numerous. Almost every kingdom had at least one royal city with over 1 million city guards. Below the royal cities were the first-class cities with 800,000 city guards, second-class cities with 400,000 city guards, third-class cities with 200,000 city guards, and third-class cities with 100,000 city guards. Below the third-class cities were the towns with 100,000 city guards. Below the towns were the villages of various sizes, and the city guards were all formed by the villagers themselves. However, the total number of soldiers in each village did not exceed 50,000, and their strength and equipment were also much weaker. Everyone on the Tianyuan continent cultivated a type of energy called Saint Force. When their Saint Force reached the 10th grade, it would condense into a Saint Weapon according to their master's thoughts. Saint Weapons came in all sorts of shapes, and their specific shape was completely based on their master's thoughts. Since Saint Weapons were completely condensed from the Saint Force within a person's body, they were connected to their master's mind once they were formed. As for those with outstanding talent, the moment their Saint Weapons were formed, they would possess certain attributes. These attributes were earth, wind, water, fire, light, and darkness. Among them, the light and darkness elements were extremely rare and at the same time extremely powerful. Light elements possessed extremely powerful healing abilities, and people who possessed light elemental Saint Weapons were known as undying people on the Tianyuan continent. This was because once they were injured in battle, they would quickly recover through their healing abilities. If they were not killed in a single strike in a battle of the same level, it would be very difficult to kill them. Darkness elements possessed powerful corrosive properties. Not only were they extremely troublesome to deal with, they were also the most troublesome people to deal with. In particular, in the night, they would come and go without a trace. They were known as the kings of the night on the continent. The night was their world. The other 4 elements also possessed their corresponding abilities. The strength of the abilities depended on the user's strength. Of course, on the Tianyuan continent, less than 1 in 10 people possessed elemental Saint Weapons. There were even more people who possessed Saint Weapons that did not possess any elemental Saint Weapons. In a battle of the same level, people who possessed elemental Saint Weapons would often be much more powerful than people who did not possess any elemental Saint Weapons. Saint Weapons were the most powerful weapons of every person. During battle, they could instantly summon the Saint Weapon from their body to assist their master in battle, allowing the master to unleash their greatest strength. At the same time, the Saint Weapon was connected to the master's life. Once the Saint Weapon suffered any great damage, it would also cause some damage to the master. If the Saint Weapon was broken, the master would also suffer a fatal blow. In severe cases, the master could even die. However, Saint Weapons were extremely tough. Unless someone was several times stronger than the master, they would not be able to cause any damage to the Saint Weapon. After the Saint Weapon was formed, the method of cultivation in the future was to absorb the spiritual energy of the world to make the Saint Weapon even more powerful, thus increasing the user's strength. After the Saint Weapon was formed, one would become a saint. On the Tianyuan continent, the strength of a saint was divided into 9 levels: Saint, Great Saint, Saint Master, Great Saint Master, Earth Saint Master, Heaven Saint Master, Saint Ruler, Holy Emperor, and Holy Emperor. Every level was further divided into 3 sublevels: early, mid, and late. On the Tianyuan continent, there was a huge mountain range that practically traversed the entire continent. This mountain range was called the Magical Beast Mountain Range. There were countless magical beasts within, and the deeper one went, the more powerful the magical beasts became. The magical beasts were divided into a total of 9 levels. A level 1 magical beast was equivalent to a human saint, a level 2 magical beast was equivalent to a human great saint, and so on. A level 8 magical beast was equivalent to a human holy emperor, and a level 9 magical beast was equivalent to a human holy emperor. At the same time, there was an extremely popular occupation on the Tianyuan continent, and that was being a mercenary. According to the books, there were many mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent. They practically covered the entire continent. These mercenaries usually earned money by completing various missions. However, even more mercenaries entered the Magical Beast Mountain Range to hunt magical beasts and obtain monster cores to earn money. Although the danger was very great, the profit was also very great. This was because the price of a monster core was very high in the Tianyuan continent. The higher the level of the monster core, the more expensive it would be. Some high-level monster cores could not even be measured by money. Monster cores were items that almost everyone on the Tianyuan continent needed. Monster cores contained extremely pure and powerful energy. This kind of energy could be directly absorbed to rapidly increase one's strength. It was several times faster than absorbing the chi of the world to cultivate. However, using monster cores to cultivate was not something that ordinary people could afford. In addition to this, Genshin also understood from the books that this world was extremely cruel. There were battles almost everywhere. It was much more dangerous than the Jianghu in his previous life. If one did not have great strength, it would be very difficult to survive in the outside world. Moreover, everyone on this continent cultivated. However, there were many people with mediocre talent who could not cultivate the saint force in their body to the 10th layer in their entire life. From there, they could condense a saint weapon within their body. If these people did not have any backing, they would often live at the lowest level of the Tianyuan continent. They were equivalent to farmers in poor villages. After reading all this information, Genshin finally had some understanding of this foreign world. Saint weapons, elemental energy, magical beasts, monster cores, and mercenaries. All of this was so new to Genshin. At the same time, Genshin's heart began to surge. This was a yearning for the outside world. He could not wait to immediately leave Changyang Prefecture and explore the outside world. However, Genshin knew that at least for the next few years, he would not be able to achieve this wish. Not to mention that his parents would not allow a child who was not even 3 years old to go out and explore the outside world. Even if he really did go out, he would not have the ability to protect himself. P.S. Actually, saint weapons are very similar to a cultivator's life-bound magic treasure. Everyone can understand it this way. In the following period of time, Genshin cultivated even more diligently. Aside from eating and doing some daily activities, he basically locked himself in his room to cultivate. Currently, he had not completed the most basic part of the first stage of the Azure Sword Codex. So the chi of heaven and earth that he had absorbed into his body had all fused into every cell in his body, including his organs, limbs, and bones, strengthening every part of his body. When his body reached a point where the chi of heaven and earth could no longer strengthen him, Genshin would then proceed to the second step, which was to cultivate his Gen Chi. So until now, other than possessing a physique that was far stronger than normal people, Genshin's Dantian was completely empty. There was not the slightest bit of Jin Chi. In his previous life, Genshin only took a year to complete the first step of the Azure Sword Codex. But in this world, the chi of heaven and earth was many times stronger than in his previous life. So even though he had not completed it in 2 years, in terms of the strength of his body, it was definitely much stronger than in his previous life. Regarding Genshin hiding in his room all day and not coming out, his parents did not reveal the slightest bit of strange expression. This was because in Changyang Prefecture, every child who had just turned 2 years old would be taught a basic breathing technique orally by their parents. Then they would be allowed to cultivate for a year. When they turned 3 years old, they would undergo the Saint Force test. This was used to evaluate their potential and aptitude. Similarly, when Genshin had just turned 2 years old, his mother, Bai Yuntian, had also orally taught him the most basic breathing technique. However, regarding this breathing technique, Genshin had directly thrown it to the back of his mind. This was because to him, this thing was no different from an adult playing with a child's toy. Therefore, when Genshin shut himself in his room all day and did not come out, outsiders would think that Genshin was cultivating the breathing technique and did not have any suspicions in their hearts. The next morning, Genshin ended a night of cultivation. Today was his special day because today was his 3rd birthday. At the same time, today he would undergo the Saint Force test that every 3-year-old child in the Tianyuan continent had to undergo. After accompanying his mother, Bai Yuntian, to the dining hall for breakfast, Genshin was led by his mother to the conference hall of Changyang Prefecture. Changyang Prefecture occupied a very large area. The area where Genshin lived was only a small courtyard in Changyang Prefecture. Walking on the road, Jianqin constantly looked at Changyang Prefecture. In the past 3 years, Jianqin had spent most of his time in his room, diligently cultivating. He rarely walked around Changyang Prefecture. In Changyang Prefecture, groups of armored guards shuttle back and forth in every area patrolling. A pair of bright eyes constantly swept back and forth in secret places. Even though it was daytime, they still did not relax at all. When Jianqin passed by a wide martial arts practice field, he was attracted by the sound of a young child shouting. He saw dozens of children under the age of 10 practicing martial arts under the guidance of a middle-aged man. Jianqin knew that these children were the direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. There were more than 1,000 people in Changyang Prefecture, other than half of them being the family guards and servants. The other half were the direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. After passing through the martial arts practice field, Jianqin finally arrived at the conference hall in the center of Changyang Prefecture under the guidance of his mother, Bai Yuntian. Chapter 7. The hall was extremely spacious, and the space inside was even larger. At this moment, there were already a dozen or so people sitting in the hall. They were all middle-aged men in different attire. Bai Yuntian brought Jianqin to a seat near the main seat and sat down. In order to have a seat here, one had to have a certain status. Although Jianqin was the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture, he did not have a seat here yet. So, Jianqin and his mother, Bai Yuntian, sat in the same seat. Jianqin obediently sat beside his mother, Bai Yuntian, and quietly waited without saying anything. Very soon, people entered the hall one after another. They found their own seats and sat down quietly. Among them, even Jianqin's 3 aunts brought their children in. Fourth brother, today is the day of your Saint Force test. You have to work hard too. Don't disappoint your second sister. Changyang Mingyue's cute face was filled with smiles as she spoke to Jianqin in a very soft tone. Although his voice was very soft, in this quiet hall, everyone could hear it clearly. Mingyue. Changyang Mingyue's mother frowned as she looked at her. Her tone was slightly reproachful. Changyang Mingyue gently smiled and stuck out her tongue at Jianqin in a cute manner. She did not say anything else, sitting quietly beside her mother. Her bright eyes flickered as she constantly studied the people in the hall. Very soon, the hall was filled with people. Everyone in the hall glanced at Jianqin from time to time. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. This time, they had all gathered together because today was the day Jianqin would take the Saint Force test when he turned 3. If it were a normal direct disciple, they would not have gathered so many people for the Saint Force test. However, Jianqin's status was different. He was the child of the head of Changyang Prefecture. Adding on the fact that he was extremely talented since young, almost everyone in Changyang Prefecture had high expectations for him. As a result, when Jianqin took the Saint Force test, these people with some status in Changyang Prefecture would naturally pay close attention. After all, today's Saint Force test would be a very important starting point for how great Jianqin's future achievements would be. After everyone had gathered, Jianqin's father, Changyang Ba, finally entered the hall. He walked up to the throne that represented the head of the family and sat down boldly. Changyang Ba's gaze paused on Jianqin for a while. A faint smile hung on his face. He then looked around, and after a few pleasantries, Jianqin's Saint Force test began very quickly. Uncle Da, I'll have to trouble you to conduct the Saint Force test for my son, Changyang Ba said politely to an old man sitting below him. The old man seemed to be in his 60s or 70s. He wore gray clothes and had a head full of white hair. His face was filled with wrinkles, but his eyes were bright. The old man smiled and said, "You're too polite, head of the family." As he said that, the old man stood up and walked to the center of the hall. He looked at Jianqin with a smile and said in a kind tone, "Fourth young master, please." Bai Yuntian looked at Jianqin, who was sitting beside her with a face full of love. Her voice was gentle as she said, "Xiang be good. Go to Uncle Da and let him test the saint force in your body. Okay, Jianchen replied softly and left his seat obediently. He walked with small steps to the old man who was called Uncle Da. Uncle Da did not waste any time and slowly raised his right hand. Then the silver-white ring on his right hand suddenly lit up with a white light. Uncle Da gently waved his right hand, and there was a soft vibration from the ground. Then, on the empty ground, a half-meter tall white stone appeared without any warning. The white stone had clearly been polished. It was rectangular in shape and was half a meter tall. Its thickness and width were both about a foot. Looking at the white stone that had suddenly appeared, Jianchen blinked his eyes. He felt that the sudden appearance of the white stone was very strange. Then Jianchen's gaze moved to Uncle Da's right hand and stared straight at the silver-white ring on his middle finger. A piece of information that he had read in a book quickly appeared in his mind. Space rings were made from extremely special and rare materials. The space within the ring varied in size. The smallest was only a meter in size, while the largest could even reach 100 meters in size. Any inanimate object could be stored inside, and it was an extremely expensive item on the Tianyuan continent. It was impossible for ordinary people to possess one. Noticing Jianchen's gaze on the space ring on his finger, Uncle Da smiled. Almost every person who saw him take out the Saint Force testing Saint Stone from his space ring would look at him the same way. Uncle Da had seen this gaze countless times already. Fourth young master, please place your hand on the Saint Stone, Uncle Da said with a smile. The Saint Stone was a special stone that could test the strength and element of Saint Force within a person. It was extremely widespread on the Tianyuan continent and was the only tool used to test a person's strength. The results of the Saint Stone's test were represented by the colors of the light, which were red, orange, yellow, green, azure, blue, and violet. Red represented the strength of those below Saint Realm. Orange represented Saint Realm. Yellow represented Great Saint Realm, and so on. Blue represented Earth Saint Masters, while violet represented Heaven Saint Masters. As for Saint Rulers above Heaven Saint Masters, such as the Holy Emperor and Holy Emperor, their strength could not be measured by the Saint Stone. With that, Jianchen looked away and extended his hand, placing it on the white stone known as the Saint Stone. At that moment, everyone's gazes gathered on the white Saint Stone. They could not help but look forward to it. They wondered just how much potential Jianchen had since he was young. When Jianchen placed his hand on the Saint Stone, Uncle Da also extended his hand and placed it on the Saint Stone. He used a special method to activate the Saint Stone. Immediately, Jianchen felt a strange energy surge out of the Saint Stone and enter his body through his arm. The strange energy was extremely gentle. After circulating through his body once, it returned to the Saint Stone through his arm. Uncle Da's old eyes stared at the change of the Saint Stone. But after a while, the Saint Stone still looked the same. There was no change at all. How is this possible? The Saint Stone did not react at all. Uncle Da could not help but exclaim. His smile gradually disappeared and was replaced by a stern expression. His gaze toward Jianchen was extremely strange. He was in slight disbelief. Noticing the expression on Uncle Da's face and the motionless Saint Stone, everyone in the hall seemed to have realized something. Their expressions couldn't help but change slightly as they looked at each other. Everyone's eyes were filled with bewilderment. There were even a few people who sighed softly, revealing a trace of pity. Changyang Ba's expression gradually turned ugly. Bai Yuntian's face also slowly paled. Her expression was filled with disbelief. Uncle Da took a deep breath. He could not believe this result. He activated the Saint Stone again, but the result was the same. The Saint Stone did not react at all. Uncle Da also could not believe this result. The fourth young master, who had been called a genius since he was young, was actually a cripple who could not cultivate. Uncle Da sighed in disappointment. He looked at the calm Jianchen with a complicated expression. He then turned to Changyang Ba and said, Patriarch, after testing, it has been determined that the fourth young master is unable to cultivate the saint force. When she heard this announcement, Bai Yuntian's face had already turned incomparably pale without a trace of blood. She stared blankly at Jianqin and muttered, "Impossible, impossible! How can Xiang be a cripple?" After muttering a few times, Bai Yuntian felt dizzy. Finally, her head tilted and she fainted on the chair. She could not accept that her son, who had always been called a genius, was actually a cripple. No mother could accept such a result, let alone someone who lived in a large family. Hearing this result, everyone in the hall sighed helplessly. They looked at Jianqin with eyes full of regret and disappointment. Jianqin's third Aunt Yufengyan and first Aunt Linglong could not help but sigh in relief. They looked at Jianqin and Bai Yuntian with eyes full of schadenfreude. "Ah, fourth sister, what happened to you? Fourth sister, wake up! Fourth sister, wake up!" At this time, Bai Yushuang, who was sitting beside Bai Yuntian, noticed that Bai Yuntian had fainted and shouted anxiously. Hearing Bai Yushuang shout, Changyangba immediately noticed the unconscious Bai Yuntian. Sighing slightly, Changyangba waved his hand and said, "Shuang, help Yin'er to rest." Jianqin also quickly walked to Bai Yuntian's side. Without anyone noticing, he gently pressed his right hand on Bai Yuntian's wrist. After testing Bai Yuntian's pulse, Jianqin confirmed that there was not much problem with Bai Yuntian. Jianqin looked at everyone in the hall and his disappointed father. He felt very helpless and secretly sighed. Then Jianqin followed Bai Yushuang, who was holding his mother, out of the hall. Alas! After Jianqin left, Changyangba sighed heavily. His face was full of disappointment. Originally, he had high expectations for his fourth son, Jianqin, but he did not expect that the higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. In the end, his fourth son, Changyang Shoten, was actually a cripple who could not cultivate. Patriarch, you don't have to worry too much. Although fourth young master is unable to cultivate, he may have outstanding talent in other aspects. A middle-aged man sitting next to him comforted. Changyangba waved his hand and said sadly, "Let's not talk about this matter anymore. Everyone is dismissed." With that, Changyangba got up and left. Although he knew that his fourth son may have outstanding talent in other aspects, the most important thing in this world was still martial strength. After all, martial strength was the foundation of everything. The news that Changyang Prefecture's fourth son, Changyang Shoten, was a cripple quickly spread to every corner of Changyang Prefecture. Some people were happy about this matter, while others were sad. However, one thing was certain. From now on, Changyang Shoten's status in Changyang Prefecture would definitely decline rapidly. Chapter 8. Looking at the silent Jianqin with his head lowered, Changyang Mingyue blinked her large eyes. She then walked to Jianqin's side and said, "Fourth brother, don't be too sad. If anyone bullies you in the future, just tell me, and I'll beat them up for you." Changyang Mingyue thought that Jianqin was sad because he could not cultivate Saint Force. Hearing that, Jianqin could not help but smile. He raised his head and looked at Changyang Mingyue. He said, "Don't worry, second sister. I'm not that easy to bully." Only Jianqin himself understood that it was not that he could not cultivate Saint Force, but that he had absorbed all the Saint Force into his body to refine it. As a result, his body was still empty. There was not a single bit of Saint Force in his dantian. Otherwise, the results of today's test would not have been like this. It was a pity that Jianqin could not tell anyone about this. Once he did, he would not be able to explain it at all. He would not tell anyone about the Azulite sword law, no matter what. Otherwise, the origin of the cultivation method would become a huge problem. Although Jianqin understood that this matter would cause his status in Changyang Prefecture to drop drastically, he did not care about this. In fact, he even hoped that this would happen. Once things really developed like this, it would be much easier for him to leave Changyang Prefecture in the future. If he really became known as a genius, it would not be so easy for him to leave Chanyang Prefecture in the future. At the very least, they would not allow him to leave before his strength was acknowledged. Xiang'er, Xiang'er, a soft voice called out from the bed. At this moment, Jianqin's mother finally woke up. Hearing the voice, Jianqin's spirit was roused. He immediately turned around and went to Bai Yuntian's side. "Mother, your son is here. Are you all right?" Bai Yuntian looked at Jianqin with a complicated gaze. She sighed and said, "Mother is fine." Xiang'er sigh. Bai Yuntian looked like she wanted to say something, but stopped herself. She looked at Jianqin with a complicated gaze. There was sorrow, sadness, and a trace of pain. "Fourth sister, you don't have to worry too much. Xiangtian has been extremely intelligent since he was young. Although it's a great pity that he can't cultivate Saint Force, in my opinion, Xiangtian isn't that simple. His future is still limitless. After all, he has an intelligent mind that other children don't have." Bai Yushuang walked over to the bedside and comforted her. Bai Yuntian nodded and said, "I also understand this principle." She then looked at Jianqin and gently stroked Jianqin's head. She said softly, "Xiang'er, you don't have to be sad. Your second aunt is right. Although you can't cultivate Saint Force, you have a smart mind. Who knows, you might have outstanding achievements in other areas." Hearing this, a trace of hesitation appeared on Jianqin's face. Seeing his mother like this, Jianqin did not feel good. At this moment, he really wanted to tell his mother the truth and say that he was not a cripple who could not cultivate Saint Force. However, in the end, Jianqin held back and said, "Mother, don't worry. Your son will not disappoint you." Jianqin cherished this motherly love that was hard to come by. On this day, Jianqin stayed in the room with his mother all day and only left when night fell. During this time, Changyangba also came to visit Bai Yuntian, but he left very quickly. As for Jianqin, Changyangba's behavior today was completely different from before. His attitude towards Jianqin had gradually become colder. All of this was seen by Jianqin. In the blink of an eye, for years had passed since the day of Jianqin's Saint Force test. During this time, Jianqin would shut himself in his room to cultivate whenever he had nothing to do. The time he spent cultivating was even longer than before. Sometimes Jianqin would not even be seen leaving his room for the entire day. In these 4 years, Jianqin's status in Changyang Prefecture had indeed dropped by a lot. Even Changyangba had become colder to him. In these 4 years, he had never taken the initiative to visit him even once. However, his mother, Bai Yuntian, came to visit Jianqin almost every day. Her love for Jianqin did not change at all. The next morning, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. After a night of cultivation, he stretched out his hands slightly. On his palms, a hazy white light gradually appeared. Then, Jianqin did a beautiful somersault in the air and landed steadily on the ground. At the same time, both of his hands were inserted into the ground. With a soft sound, Jianqin's small hands, which were as hard as 2 small steel plates, easily penetrated the extremely hard ground. Only the parts above his palms were exposed. Looking at his masterpiece, Jianqin's face revealed a joyful smile. Half a year after Jianqin's Saint Force test, he had already completed the first layer of the Azulite sword mantra. He had officially begun to cultivate Saint Force. Because he did not need to use the Saint Force he absorbed to refine his body, Jianqin's cultivation speed was extremely fast. In just a few years, he had already achieved great results. Now, with the Saint Force in his body, Jianqin could insert his hands into the hard ground of normal stone with ease. Early in the morning, Jianqin walked out of his room and wandered around Changyang Prefecture alone. However, the patrolling guards in the manor all looked at Jianqin with strange gazes. Some were mocking, some were disdainful, and some were regretful. The fact that Jianqin was a cultivation cripple was no longer a secret in Changyang Prefecture. Now, even some of the patrolling guards in Changyang Prefecture looked at Genshin in a different light. Genshin turned a blind eye to all of this. At this moment, his stomach couldn't bear the hunger and began to rumble. Genshin reached out and rubbed his stomach. He sighed inwardly and then walked towards the kitchen. It had been a long time since he had gone to the dining hall with his mother. During this period of time, Genshin would go to the kitchen to eat breakfast every morning. He would only go to the dining hall with his mother at noon and at night to eat with his aunts. When Genshin arrived at the kitchen, over 100 workers were busy inside. The kitchen was filled with smoke. Because of the stove, staying inside was like being in a steaming steamer. Oh, isn't this the fourth young master? Why has the fourth young master come to our kitchen again? Sigh, this kitchen is for us servants. Fourth young master, with your delicate body, how can you come to a place like this? A worker who seemed to be in his 20s began to tease Genshin as soon as he saw him. Everyone could tell that he was mocking Genshin with a strange tone. As soon as this person's voice fell, another worker immediately said, "If my guess is correct, the fourth young master must have come to the kitchen to get some steamed buns. But it's strange. Why didn't the fourth young master go to the dining hall to eat with the family head? Instead, you have to suffer and actually come to the kitchen to get some steamed buns. These steamed buns are for us servants and guards to eat." The one who spoke was a young man in his 30s. He looked at Genshin with a mocking expression. After listening to the two's words, the other workers in the kitchen looked at them with expressions of amusement. These two people had important people behind them. The worker in his 20s was introduced to them by Genshin's aunt, who was also the first wife of Changyang Ba, Linglong. It was said that he was related to Linglong. However, because he didn't have much ability, he could only work in the kitchen. As for the young man in his 30s, his brother was the captain of the guards in Changyang Prefecture. Hearing the two's mocking words, Genshin frowned slightly. A trace of anger flashed in his eyes. However, in the end, he restrained himself and went straight to a huge steamer. Just as he was about to reach out to open the lid of the steamer, he didn't expect that a pair of large hands would be one step ahead of him and carry the huge steamer away. "I have to quickly distribute the steamed buns in this steamer to the guards. Those brothers who are in charge of the guards in Changyang Prefecture haven't eaten breakfast yet." As he spoke, the worker carried the steamer and walked out. At the same time, he muttered to himself, "What a pity. Fourth Madam actually gave birth to such a useless son." Hearing this, Genshin's body stiffened slightly. At this moment, the anger in his heart finally couldn't help but erupt. He didn't say a word. His body swayed slightly, and his feet lightly stepped on the ground. With an extremely fast speed, he arrived behind the worker carrying the steamer and directly punched him in the back. Bam! Caught off guard, the worker carrying the steamer stumbled and fell to the ground from Genshin's punch. The steamer in his hands also fell to the ground. Immediately, round steamed buns fell out of the steamer and rolled around on the ground. This sudden turn of events stunned everyone in the kitchen. Looking at Genshin, who had suddenly changed positions, everyone in the kitchen was in disbelief. They didn't even see how Genshin had run over. What was even more unbelievable was that the 7-year-old fourth young master had actually knocked a 30-year-old man to the ground with a single punch. Even though the latter was carrying a large steamer, this scene was still inconceivable in the eyes of the workers. "Ha ha ha, Brother Chiu, you've really surprised me. No matter what, you're a third-layer Saint Force expert. You were actually knocked to the ground by a single punch from a child. Don't tell me you spent too much energy on that woman's stomach last night. You're actually so weak." Looking at the worker who had fallen to the ground, the 20-year-old man who had mocked Genshin earlier couldn't help but laugh loudly. Hearing this, the worker called Chiu, crawled up from the ground awkwardly. His eyes were filled with anger as he glared at Genshin. To be knocked to the ground by a 7-year-old child, especially a cripple who couldn't cultivate Saint Force, was a great humiliation to him. After all, although he wasn't a saint who had condensed a saint weapon, he was still someone who had reached the third layer of saint force. Blinded by anger, seemed to have forgotten that Jianqin was the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture. With a roar, he quickly came in front of Jianqin and directly threw a punch at Jianqin's chest. Seeing Qiu-er's punch, a look of disdain appeared on Jianqin's face. To him, this punch was full of flaws. Then Jianqin tilted his body slightly and took a small step to the side, just barely dodging Qiu-er's punch. He then jumped up and his right leg quickly drew a beautiful arc in the air as he kicked Qiu-er's nose. Chapter 9. Qiu-er glared at Jianqin furiously. His gaze was like that of a ferocious beast, as if he wanted to swallow Jianqin whole. "You little bastard, I'll definitely teach you a lesson today." Qiu-er roared furiously. He took 2 steps forward and approached Jianqin. He quickly kicked out, aiming for Jianqin's head. The kick was extremely fast. If it really did hit the head, it would definitely cause quite a bit of damage to an ordinary person. If it hit a normal child, it would definitely cause fatal damage. Sensing the strength of Qiu-er's kick, the young man who had mocked Jianqin earlier suddenly paled. He cried out, "Brother Qiu-er, stop!" Jianqin was the fourth young master of the Changyang Prefecture after all. He was the child of the patriarch of the Changyang Prefecture. Although he was not valued by the clan because he was a cripple who could not cultivate saint force, his status was still there. Mocking him once or twice was fine, but if they attacked the fourth young master of the Changyang Prefecture, they would definitely be severely punished. Even if they had the support of others, it would not change anything. Sensing the strength of Qiu-er's kick, Jianqin's expression changed slightly. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he leaned slightly to the side, easily dodging the kick. At the same time, Jianqin did not retreat. Instead, he charged forward, quickly approaching Qiu-er. He used one of his arms to block Qiu-er's leg that had not been retracted, yet while his other hand grabbed onto Qiu-er's other leg. With a deep roar, he lowered his waist and used all the saint force in his body. In the end, he actually used his weak body to lift Qiu-er's body that weighed over 100 kilograms. Lifting Qiu-er's body, Jianqin did not give Qiu-er any time to resist. He took a few steps forward and ran on the ground. Using the momentum, he threw Qiu-er out. Qiu-er's body flew a full 5 meters in the air before finally landing on a large table used for cutting vegetables. Coincidentally, the place where Qiu-er landed on was a strange hedgehog-like tool with steel spikes all over its body. Qiu-er's body just happened to be on top of this strange kitchen tool. The steel spikes that were over an inch long easily pierced his body. Immediately, Qiu-er let out a scream, like a pig being slaughtered. The intense pain caused even his facial muscles to twist. All the workers in the kitchen were stunned. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Not only was a 7-year-old child able to lift Qiu-er who weighed over 100 kilograms, he was also able to defeat Qiu-er who had reached the third layer of saint force. If this were to spread, no one in Changyang Prefecture would believe it. Jianqin looked coldly at the screaming Qiu-er and the other youth who was mocking him. He did not say anything and directly left the kitchen, not even taking the steamed buns. Outside, Jianqin sighed inwardly. He did not expect that the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture would be bullied by the servants in the kitchen. Jianqin threw the gloominess in his heart to the back of his mind and walked around Changyang Prefecture with small steps. Changyang Prefecture was very large. At least, Jianqin had not explored all of Changyang Prefecture in the past few years. The scenery in the prefecture was also very good. There were pavilions and towers everywhere. There were even a few small lakes. In the gardens, there were many exotic flowers and plants that gave off a faint fragrance. As the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture, Jianqin could wander around freely in Changyang Prefecture. Along the way, Jianqin discovered that there were some powerful people hiding in some of the important roads and buildings in the prefecture. Jianqin had already gotten used to this. After all, He knew that Changyang Prefecture was one of the 4 great clans in Lore City. In a first-class city like Lore City, they had a relatively high status. As he walked, Jianqin unknowingly arrived at a beautiful garden. In a spacious area, Jianqin actually discovered that his third brother, Changyang Ku, was practicing martial arts with a wooden axe in his hand. However, the way Changyang Ku swung the axe, in the eyes of a sword grandmaster like Jianqin, looked like he was just randomly chopping at the ground. There was not a single move to speak of. Although Jianqin specialized in the way of the sword, he had seen many experts who used axes and various weapons in his previous life. Therefore, Jianqin was somewhat familiar with the moves of various weapons. However, Changyang Ku's random chopping made Jianqin feel rather speechless. How was this practicing martial arts? Just as Jianqin was about to turn and leave, Changyang Ku suddenly discovered Jianqin. His hand movements suddenly stopped, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. "Fourth brother, come here. I'll give you some candy." Changyang Ku looked at Jianqin and shouted at him. Hearing Changyang Ku's words, Jianqin almost tripped and fell to the ground. He thought to himself, these words are more likely to be used to trick a 3-year-old child. However, Jianqin did not seem to realize that if he disregarded his past life, he was not much older than a 3-year-old child. Jianqin did not pay any attention to Changyang Ku's words. He did not stop walking and did not even look back as he walked away. Seeing Jianqin walk further and further away, a trace of anger appeared on Changyang Ku's face. He threw away the wooden axe in his hand and immediately chased after Jianqin, stopping him. "Fourth brother, didn't you hear me call out to you?" Changyang Ku blocked Jianqin's path and said angrily with a bulging mouth, "Do you need something?" Jianqin asked indifferently as he calmly looked at Changyang Ku. His voice was a little cold. Jianqin did not have a good impression of his third brother at all. In the past 2 years, Changyang Ku would always think of ways to bully Jianqin. Ever since the news of Jianqin not being able to cultivate Saint Force spread, Changyang Ku's actions became more and more excessive. If it were not for the fact that Jianqin rarely went out, Changyang Ku would probably have bullied Jianqin even more. However, Changyang Ku did not succeed even once. Instead, he was secretly bullied by Jianqin quite a few times, which made Changyang Ku hold a grudge against him. He always wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge. "Third brother, practice martial arts with your third brother." With that, Changyang Ku did not wait for Jianqin's agreement before grabbing Jianqin's arm and forcefully pulling him to where he had trained before. Inside, Changyang Ku was extremely excited. He could not beat Jianqin in terms of intelligence, but he did not believe that he was not Jianqin's opponent in terms of martial arts. After all, his fourth brother was a martial arts cripple. It was impossible for him to cultivate Saint Force, so he believed that winning was a good opportunity to bully Jianqin. Very soon, Jianqin was forcefully pulled to where he had trained before by Changyang Ku. Changyang Ku picked up the wooden axe that he had thrown to the side and looked at Jianqin with an evil smile. He said, "Fourth brother, are you ready? I'm about to attack." Seeing the feminine smile on Changyang Ku's face, Jianqin revealed a look of ridicule. He spread out his hands and said, "Third brother, you have a weapon in your hand. Do you want me to fight you empty-handed?" Hearing that, Changyang Ku was stunned. He looked at the wooden axe in his hand and hesitated slightly before tossing it to Jianqin. He said, "Fourth brother, you take the axe. I'll fight you empty-handed." Although the axe was made of wood, it still weighed around 5 kilograms. It would be quite difficult for an ordinary child who was not even 10 years old to lift it. Changyang Ku had seen this point, which was why he tossed it to Jianqin. He wanted to see him make a fool of himself. Jianqin caught the wooden axe and examined it. The craftsmanship of the axe was extremely crude. It only had the shape of an axe, and the blade was not sharpened. Even if it struck him, he would not be injured. At most, he would feel a little pain. A sliver of surprise appeared in Changyang Ku's eyes when he saw Jianqin easily borrow the axe that weighed over 5 kilograms. This situation had exceeded his expectations. Jianqin looked at Changyangku and faintly smiled. He said, "Third brother, you should use this axe." With that, Jianqin tossed the axe back to Changyangku. Catching the axe that Jianqin tossed over, Changyangku asked in doubt, "Fourth brother, do you want to fight me without a weapon?" Jianqin gently chuckled and shook his head. Afterward, he arrived beside a small tree and broke off a meter-long branch. He removed all the leaves on it, leaving behind a bare branch. He returned it to its original position. "This is my weapon." Jianqin gently smiled as he waved the branch in his hand. Changyangku glanced at the chopstick-sized branch in Jianqin's hand. Not only was he not angry, he even smiled happily. In his opinion, defeating Jianqin today was becoming easier and easier. As soon as he thought about how he could finally bully his fourth brother who had caused him so much trouble, Changyangku became excited. Changyangku slowly tightened his grip on the axe and said, "Fourth brother, be careful. I'm going to attack." With that, Changyangku immediately charged forward and arrived before Jianqin. He gripped the axe tightly with both hands and viciously swung it at Jianqin. The wooden axe could not kill anyone at all, so Changyangku did not hold back at all. He struck with extreme force. Jianqin staggered and easily dodged Changyangku's axe. Afterward, he quickly stabbed out with the branch in his hand. The moment he stabbed out, Jianqin's presence suddenly changed. It became as sharp as a sword, and the branch in his hand seemed to possess an unstoppable force. At that moment, the ordinary branch seemed to have become a real sword in Jianqin's hand. Jianqin stabbed out with the branch extremely quickly, so fast that Changyangku did not even notice it. The branch had already stopped before Changyangku's throat. "Third brother, you've lost," Jianqin softly said as he looked at Changyangku, who still had not pulled back his axe in time, in a playful manner. Changyangku blankly stared at the branch that had stopped right in front of his throat. Disbelief filled his eyes. He did not see how the branch had arrived. All he saw was a blur, and the next thing he knew, the branch was right in front of his throat. After blanking out for a while, Changyangku suddenly returned to his senses. He extended his hand and snapped the branch in half. He loudly said in an unconvinced manner, "It doesn't count, it doesn't count. Fourth brother, you cheated." Jianqin looked at the slightly reddened Changyangku in amusement. He said in a strange tone, "Third brother, how did I cheat?" I dashed. Changyangku scratched his head when he heard that. He stammered, unable to say anything. In the end, he snorted, "It doesn't count anyway. Let's do it again." Chapter 10. Changyangku gripped his axe tightly as he looked at Jianqin cautiously. With the lesson from before, he no longer dared to underestimate Jianqin, so he was especially cautious this time. Jianqin maintained a faint smile the entire time. When he looked at Changyangku, there was a teasing look in his eyes that Changyangku could not understand. He said, "Third brother, can we begin the attack?" Changyangku gripped his axe tightly. This time, he circulated all the saint force in his body before charging at Jianqin again. He was clearly much faster than before. Jianqin casually waved the branch that was only half a meter long. He suddenly had a wondrous feeling, as if there was an extremely obscure connection between his soul and the branch. At the same time, Jianqin could not help but think about how he had only comprehended the ability to control swords with his soul when he was about to die in his previous life. In the end, the sword in his hand flew 100 meters and pierced through Duga Chobai's throat under the control of his soul. Thinking up to there, Jianqin subconsciously controlled the branch in his hand to stab at Changyangku. Swish! As soon as he thought of that, the branch in Jianqin's hand seemed to come alive. It flew out of Jianqin's hand on its own and stabbed at Changyangku with great speed. The entire branch was enveloped by a faint white light as strands of powerful and sharp sword qi radiated from it. The branch moved extremely quickly, as quick as lightning. With a flash of light, it arrived before Changyang's chest. Jianshan paled in fright when he sensed the speed of the branch and the sword qi that had appeared out of nowhere. He immediately controlled the branch to stop. He had no doubt that the branch could easily pierce through Changyang's body with the speed of the branch and the sword qi that had suddenly appeared. Even if Jianshan did not die, he would still be heavily injured. Once that happened, Jianshan would be in great trouble. The branch finally stopped when it reached Changyang's chest. Even though that was the case, the tip of the branch still pierced Changyang's chest. Fortunately, it did not go too deep, only piercing his skin. If Jianshan had reacted a little slower, Changyang's body would have been pierced. The consequences would have been unthinkable then. Jianshan wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. His soul had an extremely obscure connection with the branch. So through the connection, Jianshan understood that the branch had only pierced Changyang's skin a little. It was not a big deal. Only then did Jianshan relax. The pain from his chest caused Changyang's chubby face to pale involuntarily. When he lowered his head and saw the blood on his chest, his expression suddenly changed and he began to cry. Tears poured out of his eyes like a fountain. I'm bleeding. Wah, brother, you hit me. Wah, mother, I'm going to tell mother, brother hit me. At that moment, Changyang seemed to have turned into a naughty child who loved to cry. He threw away the wooden axe in his hand and ran out of the garden while crying. After all, Changyang was not even 10 years old, and he was still a child who had grown up in a greenhouse. Jianshan helplessly shook his head as he watched Changyang gradually disappear from his sight. He walked back to his residence. He understood that he would probably be severely reprimanded soon. What? Changbo, you're not joking with me, right? The patriarch of the Changyang prefecture, Changyang Ba, suddenly stood up from his chair in the study room. He stared at the old man in front of him as he spoke in surprise. The old man was the caretaker of the Changyang prefecture. Changbo nodded with certainty. He said with a serious expression, Patriarch, I didn't believe it at first, but there were several dozen people in the kitchen who saw it clearly. The fourth young master did indeed injure a worker who was working in the kitchen. In the end, he even lifted the worker who weighed over 100 kilograms and threw him 5 meters away. Most importantly, this worker was at the 3rd layer of Saint Force. The surprise in Changyang Ba's eyes became even heavier when he heard that. There was even some disbelief in his eyes. Changbo looked at Changyang Ba and hesitated slightly before speaking again. Patriarch, I just received news that the 4th young master injured the 3rd young master with a single branch when he was sparring in the garden. What? Xiang and Ku were sparring, and Xiang actually injured Ku? Changyang Ba's voice was once again filled with surprise. Yes, Patriarch. Furthermore, the 4th young master only used a tree branch, while the 3rd young master used a wooden axe, Changbo added. How is that possible? Changyang Ba stood up from his chair again and said, Xiang is unable to cultivate Saint Force. On the other hand, Ku is older than Xiang, by 3 years and has reached the 3rd layer of Saint Force. In addition, he has been training every day. How could he be defeated by Xiang, who doesn't know any martial arts? At this moment, a half-meter-long tree branch suddenly appeared in Changbo's hand. He said, Patriarch, the 4th young master used this tree branch to defeat the 3rd young master. Changyang Ba took the tree branch that was thinner than a pinky finger from Changbo. On the other side of the tree branch, there was still a bit of blood. When Changyang Ba's gaze landed on the dried blood on the broken part of the tree branch, his expression suddenly became serious. He said, Changbo, is Ku all right? The 3rd young master is fine. It's just a scratch, Changbo replied. Changyang Ba nodded slightly. Only then did his expression become better. He took the tree branch in his hand and carefully examined it several times. His expression became more and more doubtful. In the end, he could not help but say, Changbo, this is just an extremely ordinary tree branch. The tip is also extremely flat. With Xiang Er's strength, he shouldn't be able to injure Ku, or with this tree branch. Hearing this, Changbo nodded slightly. A light gradually appeared in his eyes as he said, "Patriarch, I have a bold guess. The fourth young master might not be a cripple who can't cultivate Saint Force. Looking at the fourth young master's performance today, perhaps he has already cultivated Saint Force. Moreover, it's at the fourth layer of Saint Force at the very least. Otherwise, the fourth young master wouldn't have been able to defeat Xiao, who had reached the third layer of Saint Force." Hearing this, Changyangba's face filled with joy. A trace of excitement gradually appeared in his eyes. Changyangba's greatest regret had always been his fourth son, who had been extremely talented since he was young, but was unable to cultivate. "Changbo, are you saying that not only can Xiang cultivate Saint Force, he's also a cultivation genius?" Changyangba's voice trembled slightly. He was filled with excitement. Reaching the fourth layer of Saint Force at the age of 7 was indeed a rare genius on the Tianyuan continent. After all, under normal circumstances, one would need to be around 8 or 9 years old to reach the fourth layer of Saint Force. Changbo nodded slightly. "I've watched the fourth young master grow up. I can clearly see his extraordinary talent. I've always held great expectations for the fourth young master. I can faintly feel that in the near future, the fourth young master's achievements will definitely surpass mine." Hearing Changbo's last sentence, Changyangba's body could not help but tremble slightly. Disbelief and joy filled his eyes. Changbo continued, "When I first learned that the fourth young master was a cripple who could not cultivate Saint Force, I also felt that it was extremely strange. I always felt that something was wrong, but I never understood what the problem was. Only today, after seeing the 2 things that the fourth young master has done, have I confirmed that my previous guess was correct. The fourth young master is not someone who cannot cultivate Saint Force, but is instead a cultivation genius." Changyangba took a deep breath and slowly calmed his excitement. Just as he was about to say something, a servant suddenly ran in and respectfully said to Changyangba, "Patriarch, the third young master is injured. The third madam has invited you over." "All right, you may leave." Changyangba waved his hand and calmly said, "Yes." The servant responded respectfully and slowly retreated. Changyangba looked at the housekeeper, Changbo, and said with a faint smile, "Changbo, why don't we go together and take a look? We can also go and show some concern for Xiang. We have indeed neglected Xiang during this period of time." Changyangba paused for a moment before saying in a serious tone, "Changbo, I'll have to trouble you to chase those 2 kitchen workers who bullied Xiang out of Changyang Prefecture." "Humph, 2 servants actually dare to bully my son." Changbo smiled and said, "Patriarch, I've already chased those 2 out of the mansion. Although one of them was introduced by the first madam and the other is the younger brother of the guard captain, Qiuling. Since they dared to bully the fourth young master, there's no need for them to continue staying in the mansion. Otherwise, where would my Changyang Prefecture's face go?" Changyang Ku, who had been injured by Jianqin, lay on the bed in a spacious and luxuriously decorated room. His face was slightly pale, and the wound on his chest had already been carefully bandaged. Changyang Ku's mother, Yu Fengyan, sat on the bed as she stared at her son in pain. Nearby, Jianqin and his mother by Yuntian, as well as his first aunt, Linglong, second aunt by Yushuang, and second sister, Changyang Mingyue, stood in the room. Yu Fengyan turned around and glared angrily at Bai Yuntian. Her voice was a little gloomy as she said, "Fourth sister, your precious son is getting bolder and bolder. He actually used a weapon to injure Ku-er. Fortunately, my Ku-er is blessed with good fortune and was not seriously injured. Otherwise, I really don't know what the consequences would be." Hearing this, Jianqin frowned and unhappily said, "You can't blame me for this. It was third brother who took the initiative to ask me to spar with him. Moreover, it was inevitable that I would receive some light injuries from a fight. Also, I didn't use a lethal weapon, only a tree branch. If you want to blame someone, then you can only blame third brother for not being skilled enough. Yu Fengyan's face paled when she heard what Jianchen had said. However, Jianchen's words just happened to make a lot of sense, so Yu Fengyan could not find anything to say to that. Yu Fengyan felt an indescribable anger when she thought about how she had been troubled by a child. In particular, Jianchen's final words, "You can only blame third brother for not being skilled enough." Yu Fengyan's face paled. Was he not implying that her son was worse than a cripple who could not cultivate saint force? Chapter 11. Bai Yuntian gently rubbed Jianchen's head. She looked at Jianchen with a doting gaze before slowly making her way forward. She said, "Third sister, this is only a quarrel between children, so let's not worry about it. There's no need to get angry over something like this. After all, Xiang'er and Ku are still children who don't know any better. Let me heal Ku-er's wound right now." Hearing Bai Yuntian's words, even though Yu Fengyan was still very angry in her heart, it was not good for her to say anything. If she continued to argue with a child over this matter, perhaps the other 3 sisters in the room would view her in a new light. Bai Yuntian arrived before Changyang-ku and slowly closed her eyes. In the next moment, a faint white light slowly radiated from Bai Yuntian's hands. At the same time, a gleam of light flashed through Jianchen's eyes. He could clearly sense that a special energy in the surroundings was slowly gathering towards his mother's hands before forming a ball of white light. At the same time, this special energy was the same energy that Jianchen had sensed from the energy of the world. Jianchen focused on the movements of his mother's hands. At that moment, he suddenly realized that he might be able to understand how to use this special energy from his mother. After all, he had already sensed that this special energy that was connected to the energy of the world was not so simple. The white light in Bai Yuntian's hands became brighter and brighter. It was gentle and not dazzling at all. After brewing for a few seconds, Bai Yuntian gently waved her hands. The milky white light left her hands and drifted towards Changyang-ku's chest. In the end, it slowly merged with the wound on his chest. Since Changyang-ku's chest was covered by a layer of white cloth, Jianchen was unable to see what had happened when the milky white light merged with Changyang-ku's wound. After doing all that, Bai Yuntian exhaled and said, "All right, third sister. Ku is fine now. His wound should be completely healed now." Yu Fengyan finally smiled happily. After thanking Bai Yuntian, she quickly made her way to Changyang-ku's side and asked in concern, "Ku-er, how do you feel now? Does your wound still hurt?" Changyang-ku extended his hand and touched the wound on his chest. He chuckled, "Mother, it doesn't hurt anymore. It's very comfortable." As he said that, he removed the cloth on his chest. After removing the cloth, Changyang-ku's chest was completely clean. Aside from a few dried scars, there were no longer any wounds. Jianchen immediately understood when he saw this. This mysterious energy was called Radiant Saint Force. This energy had extremely miraculous effects when it came to healing. No matter how severe the wound was, it could be healed very quickly. His mother was a Radiant Saint Master, so she was able to use this energy to heal with great proficiency. Legend had it that a few powerful Radiant Saint Masters could even regrow severed limbs. They could even bring the dead back to life. Jianchen could not help but think that since he could sense the existence of Radiant Saint Force and successfully absorb it, would he be able to use Radiant Saint Force to heal like his mother? As soon as he thought of this, Jianchen was rather eager to try it out. However, he held back in the end. This was not a suitable place for him to experiment. At this moment, the door suddenly opened. Jianchen's father, Changyang Ba, and the caretaker of the Changyang Prefecture, Changbo, walked in at the same time. "What's wrong with Ku-er? Are your wounds serious?" Changyang Ba asked as soon as they entered the room. His voice was filled with concern. "Thank you for your concern. After fourth sister's treatment, Ku-er is fine now." Yu Fengyan faintly smiled. She felt extremely happy that Changyang cared so much about her son. It's good that you're fine. Changyang nodded slightly. He then looked at Jianqin gently and asked, Xiang, have you been well these days? His voice was filled with concern. Thank you for your concern, father. I've been well. Jianqin's tone was very calm. This was the first time that Changyang had taken the initiative to speak to Jianqin after the sacred power test. Hearing Jianqin's calm yet cold tone, Changyang sighed inwardly and said, Xiang, come with father to the study. With that, Changyang turned around and left. Very soon, Jianqin followed Changyang and Changbo into the study. Changyang sat on a chair and stared at Jianqin calmly for a while. He then asked, Xiang, I heard that you injured Qiu in the kitchen this morning. Yes. Jianqin already knew that his strength had been exposed, so he did not hide it anymore. Changyang eyes revealed a trace of joy and a smile appeared on his face. He said gently, Xiang tell father, have you already cultivated Saint Force? Jianqin nodded slightly and replied with the same indifferent tone, Yes. Jianqin also knew that this matter could not be hidden, so he very straightforwardly admitted it. Although he had already guessed that Jianqin had already cultivated Saint Force, Changyang could not help but feel a little excited when he received confirmation from Jianqin. Changbo, I'll have to trouble you to help Xiang, test the strength of his Saint Force. Changyang face was filled with joy as he spoke to Changbo. His tone was very polite, not at all like the attitude of a family head speaking to a housekeeper. Changbo smiled and took out a fist-sized Saint Stone from the space ring on his finger. He walked over to Jianqin and said gently, Fourth young master, place your hand on it. When Jianqin placed his hand on the Saint Stone, Changbo also activated the Saint Stone. Immediately, Jianqin felt a mysterious energy emit from the Saint Stone. It flowed through his arm and into his body. After circulating through his body, it returned to the Saint Stone. At the same time, the Saint Stone suddenly emitted a faint red light. Seeing the red light from the Saint Stone, Changyang immediately became excited. Even Changbo smiled faintly. He looked at Jianqin with gratification. Patriarch, according to the strength of the light, the fourth young master's Saint Force has already reached the fourth layer. Changbo said with a smile. The fourth layer, the fourth layer. Changyang slowly stood up from his chair. He was so excited that his hands were tightly clenched together. Although he had already guessed this before, it was only a guess. Now that he knew the truth, he felt a different feeling. Jianqin had reached the fourth layer of Saint Force at the age of 7. This achievement was not particularly outstanding on the Tianyuan continent, but in the kingdom of Jessen, it was enough to make him a first-rate genius. His third brother, Changyang was 3 years older than Jianqin, but he had only reached the fourth layer of Saint Force. Changbo placed the Saint Stone back into his space ring and looked at Jianqin in gratification. He smiled. Fourth young master, you really haven't disappointed me. Changyang calmed down very quickly. His gaze toward Jianqin had completely changed. It was filled with joy, excitement, and gratification. When Jianqin left the study, it was almost noon. After Jianqin left, Changyang looked at Changbo and said with some doubt, Changbo, since Xiang has Saint Force, why didn't it show during the test last time? I thought Xiang was a cripple who couldn't cultivate. Changbo frowned slightly. After thinking for a while, he slowly said, I'm not sure either. Maybe there was a problem during the test last time, but that's not important anymore. Changyang nodded and said, Xiang is only 7 years old, but his Saint Force has already reached the fourth layer. If this continues, I estimate that Xiang will break through to the 10th layer of Saint Force and condense a Saint weapon by the age of 18. Moreover, Xiang talent has been outstanding since he was young, so I want to send Xiang to Kargath Academy as soon as possible. What does Changbo think? Hearing this, Changbo thought for a while and said, Kargath Academy is the most famous academy in the kingdom of Jesson, but the entry requirements are not low. One must reach the 8th layer of Saint Force and must not be older than 18 years old. Patriarch wants to send 4th young master to Kargath Academy as soon as possible, but I'm afraid it won't be possible in a short period of time. Although 4th young master Saint Force has already reached the 4th layer, it will still take a long time before he reaches the 8th layer. After all, it will become more and more difficult to increase one's Saint Force. I hope that Xiang'er Saint Force can reach the 8th layer in the next few years. Changyangba said softly. Changbo smiled and said, Patriarch, don't worry. I believe that 4th young master will reach the 8th layer sooner or later. It's only a matter of time. When I tested 4th young master Saint Force just now, I found that 4th young master Saint Force is not far from the 5th layer. Hearing this, Changyangba was unable to contain his joy and muttered, I hope that Xiang'er's achievements in the future will surpass Changbo's and become the pillar of the clan. Changbo stood to the side and smiled without saying anything. His eyes were filled with undisguised expectation. After leaving the study, Genshin immediately returned to his room as fast as he could and closed the door tightly. He thought back to the frightening scene when he fought with Changyangku. Although Genshin knew that he had broken through at the last moment during his battle with Dugachobai in his previous life and reached the realm of sword manipulation, he did not dare to imagine that he would still be able to use the sword manipulation ability after reincarnating. Thinking that he could use such an ability, Genshin could not help but feel excited and emotional. However, when Genshin thought back to the mysterious sword chi that appeared on the tree branch, he felt extremely puzzled. He did not possess the strength that he had in his previous life. So how could such a sharp sword chi appear on the tree branch that he controlled? After thinking for a while with furrowed brows, Genshin finally decided to try again. He looked around the room and finally broke off a 2-foot-long piece of wood from a wooden hanger and used it as a sword. Holding the 2-foot-long piece of wood, Genshin's heart gradually calmed down. Gradually, Genshin seemed to realize that the piece of wood in his hand was not a piece of wood, but a sword. A divine sword, an indestructible divine sword. It was as if it had become one with him. Although Genshin did not look at the piece of wood in his hand, the texture of the wood clearly appeared in his mind. He even knew the internal structure of the piece of wood. Genshin took a deep breath and slowly calmed down the excitement in his heart. Then, with a thought, he tried to control the piece of wood in his hand to fly by itself. Just when this thought appeared in Genshin's mind, he suddenly realized that his spirit had established a very obscure connection with the piece of wood in his hand. At the same time, the piece of wood also slowly left Genshin's hand and floated in the air by itself. According to Genshin's thoughts, it slowly flew forward. On the piece of wood, a faint white light suddenly appeared. Traces of powerful and sharp sword chi were emitted from it. At this moment, Genshin felt that his spirit had completely merged with the piece of wood. This piece of wood was like his arm, and he could freely control it to do any action. At the same time, he also felt that the sword chi that suddenly appeared on the piece of wood seemed to be related to his spirit. Then, with a thought from Genshin, the piece of wood floating in the air suddenly turned into a ray of white light and quickly revolved around Genshin's body. Its speed was so fast that Genshin could not see it clearly. Genshin's heart uncontrollably beat violently, and his face revealed an expression of wild joy. He did not expect that he could still use the spirit sword manipulation that he comprehended at the last moment in his previous life. Now, this spirit sword manipulation divine ability was not only Genshin's most powerful attack, but also a life-saving method for Genshin. Unknowingly, a few years had passed. Now, Genshin was already 15 years old. In these few years, Genshin rarely went out and spent all his time in his room, cultivating the Azulet sword techniques. Because Genshin's strength had been exposed and he was recognized as a cultivation genius, his status in Changyang Prefecture rose. No one in the prefecture dared to look down on him anymore. Changyangba was also very concerned about Jianqin, almost to the point of being meticulous. Among them, the most excited was Bai Yuntian. Her son, who was originally recognized as a trash who could not cultivate, had now turned into a cultivation genius. He had even reached the 4th layer of Saint Force at the age of 7. Bai Yuntian's joy towards her son being so outstanding could be imagined. However, Jianqin discovered that after his strength was exposed, his eldest aunt, Linglong, and third aunt, Yufengyan, would always look at him with a slightly unfriendly gaze. Jianqin, who possessed the memories of his past life, was well aware of this situation. In these few years, Jianqin's Saint Force had already reached the 8th layer. Moreover, this was because Jianqin had intentionally slowed down his cultivation speed. This was because in these few years, almost half of Jianqin's time was used to familiarize himself with the sword techniques he had learned in his past life. Otherwise, his Saint Force would have broken through to the 8th layer long ago. Even so, Jianqin was not far from the 9th layer of Saint Force. Currently, in Changyang Prefecture, Jianqin's strength had already firmly surpassed his second sister, Changyang Mingyue, and third brother, Changyang Ku. Although Changyang Mingyue was older than Jianqin by 3 years, her Saint Force was still at the 7th layer. As for Changyang Ku, perhaps it was because he did not have any talent for cultivation in the first place. At the age of 17, his Saint Force had only barely reached the 5th layer. Early in the morning, a large group of people gathered outside a large hall. Among them were Jianqin's parents and 3 aunts. Even his third brother, Changyang Ku, and second sister, Changyang Mingyue, were present. Other than them, there were also a few elders from Changyang Prefecture. Not far from the group of people, a 3-meter-long, bird-type magical beast quietly sat on the ground. Today was the day that Jianqin would be heading to Kargath Academy to study. The minimum requirement to enter Kargath Academy was that one Saint Force had reached the 8th layer, and one's age could not exceed 18. Jianqin had already met this requirement. Moreover, today just happened to be the annual recruitment meet of Kargath Academy. Bai Yuntian looked at Jianqin with tears streaming down her face. Her eyes were filled with love as she said, "Xiang'er, you have to study hard in the academy. Try to avoid causing trouble as much as possible. Do you understand?" Bai Yuntian's voice was filled with concern. Jianqin nodded obediently and said, "Don't worry, mother. I know what to do." Changyangba arrived before Jianqin and said, "Xiang'er, I specially prepared this space belt for you. Although it's not very valuable, and the space inside isn't very large, it's enough to store small things. If you can break through the 10th layer of Saint Force before you turn 18 and condense a Saint weapon into a Saint Expert, I'll give you a space ring and a Class 4 monster core." With that, a belt with exquisite craftsmanship appeared in Changyangba's hand. Looking at the size of the belt, it was clearly tailor-made for Jianqin. Seeing that Changyangba was actually so concerned about Jianqin, Linglong and Yufengyan, who were standing to the side, revealed deep jealousy and dissatisfaction in their eyes. However, at this time, everyone's eyes were focused on Jianqin, so no one paid attention to them. Jianqin took the belt and said, "Father, it won't be long before I become a Saint Expert." Jianqin's voice was filled with strong confidence. Changyangba revealed a faint smile on his face. Looking at Jianqin, his eyes were filled with gratification. "Fourth young master, it's getting late. We should be on our way." At this time, housekeeper Changbo, who was standing to the side, spoke. Jianqin glanced at his mother one last time before returning to Changbo's side without looking back. He said, "Changbo, let's go." Changbo extended his hand and carried Jianqin onto the back of the flying magical beast. Afterward, he jumped on himself and sat down beside Jianqin. He smiled at Jianqin and said, "Fourth young master, sit tight." Chapter 12. Sitting on the back of the flying magic beast, Genshin's expression didn't change even though they were flying at a high speed a few thousand meters above the ground. The flying magic beast's flying speed was extremely fast. The whistling wind in the sky had already formed an endless rumbling sound in Genshin's ears. Seeing Genshin's calm expression, Changbo couldn't help but slightly nod his head as a trace of admiration appeared in his eyes. When most children first sat on a flying magic beast, they would all be scared to the point that their faces would turn pale and their bodies would tremble. There were even some who would be so scared that they would piss their pants. There were very few people who could remain as calm as Genshin. Changbo couldn't help but recall a few years ago when he sent the young master of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang, to Kargath Academy, sitting on a flying magic beast. Changyang, who was so scared that he didn't even dare to move. His entire body trembled as he clung tightly to the back of the flying magic beast, his hands tightly clutching onto the feathers. The fourth young master really is extraordinary. I just don't know how great his achievements will be in the future. Changbo silently thought to himself. Genshin looked at the magic beast below him and asked, Changbo, what kind of magic beast is this? Its flying speed is really fast. Of course. Changbo's tone revealed a trace of pride as he said, Fourth young master, don't look down on this magic beast. This magic beast is called a soaring hawk and is a class 4 magic beast. Its strength is equivalent to a great Saint Master, and its flying speed is extremely fast. Although it is only class 4 if it flies in the air, even Earth Saint Masters can't do anything to it. Then this soaring hawk must be very expensive. Genshin asked. Changbo nodded his head and said, Of course. Flying magic beasts are extremely expensive. This is not only because they are difficult to catch, but also because they are extremely difficult to tame. Although flying magic beasts are the fastest means of transportation, riding on them is also the most dangerous. If the magic beast loses control and falls from 1,000 meters in the air, even if you have the strength of an Earth Saint Master, it would still be very difficult to survive. Even if you don't die, you would still be heavily injured. As a result, even Class 1 and Class 2 magic beasts are extremely expensive. Moreover, most magic beasts are violent in their hearts and are unwilling to submit to others, so taming a magic beast is extremely difficult. Genshin nodded his head slightly before gradually falling silent. Changbo looked at the silent Genshin and said, Fourth young master, your elder brother Changyang, who is also studying in Kargath Academy. After a few years of cultivation, he should not be far from Saint Realm. If you encounter any problems in the academy, you might as well ask your elder brother to help you deal with them. Yes, I understand. Genshin gently replied. Genshin had never seen this mysterious elder brother of his. Moreover, he was not clear about his elder brother's personality. He really was worried that his elder brother would be jealous of his talent in cultivation and end up like his third brother, Changyang, who would think of ways to make things difficult for him. After all, living in a large clan, this kind of thing was not uncommon. In his past life, Genshin had seen many cases of brothers killing each other because of the struggle for power in the clan. In Genshin's heart, he really did not wish for this kind of thing to happen to him. In his past life, he was an orphan and had never felt any familial affection. Since the heavens had given him a family, now he cherished this family very much. The flying eagle's flying speed was very fast. After half a day of flight, they finally arrived at Kargath Academy. At this time, under the control of Changbo, the eagle had already descended to a height of 100 meters in the air. Kargath Academy was built on a plain. It was surrounded by a 10-meter tall wall. The academy was very large and occupied a very large area. Even from 100 meters in the air, Genshin could not see the entirety of the academy. Kargath Academy was the most famous academy in the Jessan Empire. Today was the opening ceremony of the academy, so the entrance of the academy was very lively. There were a lot of people. Not far away, there were many luxurious carriages parked. However, the horses were replaced by magic beasts that Jianchen did not know the name of. Almost every carriage was guarded by a few guards. In the sky, from time to time, there would be flying magic beasts flying over the walls of the academy. Without exception, there was a young child on the back of the flying magic beast. Changbo controlled the flying magic beast to directly enter the academy. Finally, they arrived at the center of the academy and stopped in front of a 100-meter tall tower. Then he directly led Jianchen into the tower. Outside the tower, there were still many flying magic beasts parked there. Afterwards, Jianchen followed Changbo to the top floor of the tower and saw the principal of Kargath Academy. The principal was an old man around the same age as Changbo. What surprised Jianchen was that the principal and Changbo were friends despite the difference in age. Because of his relationship with Changbo, the problem of Jianchen entering the academy was easily solved. Afterwards, under the orders of the principal, Jianchen's brother, Changyang-hu, was also called to the tower. This allowed Jianchen to finally see this mysterious brother that he had never seen before. Changyang, who was already 18 this year, the same age as Jianchen's sister, Changyang Mingyue. However, he was only 3 months older than Changyang Mingyue. Changyang, who was an extremely sturdy young man. He was a head taller than Jianchen and wore the uniform of the academy. He had already been in the academy for over 2 years, and his Saint Force had already reached the peak of the 10th layer. However, he still had not condensed a Saint weapon. Although the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force was only a single step away from Saint Realm, there was a huge gap in between. Condensing a Saint weapon was extremely difficult. On the Tianyuan continent, there were some people who would never be able to condense a Saint weapon in their entire lives. Without great talent, it would be very difficult to successfully condense a Saint weapon. According to the principal, Changyang, who had already reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force a year ago. During that time, he had attempted to condense a Saint weapon 3 times, but all of them ended in failure. However, on the Tianyuan continent, there were not many people who could successfully condense a Saint weapon at the age of 18. Normally, they would only condense a Saint weapon at the age of 20. Of course, there were also some people with weaker talent who could only condense a Saint weapon in their 20s. However, these people would not be able to go very far on the martial path. Due to the abundance of spiritual qi on the Tianyuan continent, the lifespan of people was usually around 200 years. Being able to condense a Saint weapon at the age of 20 was already considered pretty good. Changbo pointed at Changyang-hu and said to Jianchen, "Fourth young master, this is your big brother, Changyang-hu." Changbo then looked at Changyang-hu and said, "First young master, this is your 4th brother, Changyang-shoten." Big brother. Jianchen looked at Changyang-hu and smiled. He called out softly, which could be considered a greeting. However, no matter how he looked at it, he felt that Changyang-hu was a little silly, which was completely different from what he had imagined. Hearing Jianchen's call, Changyang-hu scratched his head and chuckled. "4th brother, I can't let you call me big brother for nothing. In the future, if anyone bullies you in the academy, you can come find big brother. Big brother will beat them up for you." Hearing this, Jianchen smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble big brother in the future." Jianchen had a pretty good impression of his big brother, Changyang-hu, when they first met. Now, the remaining worry in Jianchen's heart had completely vanished with Changyang-hu's words. Changyang-hu shook his head and chuckled. "It's no trouble at all. No matter what, I'm still your big brother. Protecting 4th brother is something I should do." With that, Changyang-hu paused and looked around. A trace of doubt appeared in his eyes as he asked Changbo, "Changbo, where are 2nd sister and 3rd brother?" "First young master, 2nd sister, and 3rd young master have not reached the requirements to enter the academy, so only 4th young master has come alone," Changbo calmly said. "Oh." Hearing this, Changyang, whose eyes revealed a trace of disappointment, he murmured, Why haven't they reached the requirements to enter the academy? Aren't they too stupid? Fourth brother is still the best, reaching the 8th layer of Saint Force so quickly. He's even better than me, his big brother. First young master, take fourth young master down first. From now on, you have to take good care of your fourth brother. I still have some matters to discuss with the principal, Changbo said. Changyang, who firmly nodded and patted his chest as he promised. Changbo, don't worry. I definitely won't let fourth brother be bullied in the academy. After that, Jianqin received a name tag and left with his big brother, Changyang Hu. After walking out of the tower, Jianqin looked at the name tag in his hand. Aside from being a student, this name tag also had the address of the dormitory on it. Although Jianqin wasn't familiar with the geography of Kargath Academy, with his big brother, Changyang, who, leading the way, they quickly arrived at the address on the name tag. The dormitories in the academy were all built with a very sturdy stone. There were a total of 2 areas. One area was for commoner students, while the other was for students like Jianqin, who had some background. The environment was much better than the commoners' area. Since Kargath was the most famous academy in the kingdom of Jessen, it naturally had its own uniqueness. The rules of Kargath Academy were very strict. The minimum requirement to enter was to reach the 8th layer of Saint Force before the age of 18. As long as you met the requirements, you would have the opportunity to enter Kargath Academy. If you didn't meet the requirements, even if you were from a powerful noble family, you wouldn't be able to enter Kargath Academy. Due to the fact that Kargath Academy's entrance fee was very low, the majority of commoners were able to accept it. As for those who met the entrance requirements and came from poor families, Kargath Academy would waive all of their tuition fees. Therefore, the majority of Kargath Academy's students were commoners. However, those commoners who were able to come to Kargath Academy all had decent talent in cultivation. In Kargath Academy, there was an ironclad rule. Noble students were not allowed to bully commoner students. Otherwise, no matter how powerful your family background was, you would be severely punished. In serious cases, you might even be expelled from the academy. Although this would offend a few large families, Kargath Academy was backed by the Kingdom of Jessen. Moreover, its principal was one of the 6 strongest in the Kingdom of Jessen. Therefore, the large families in the Kingdom of Jessen didn't dare to object to this rule. Jianqin's dormitory was a small room about 10 square meters in size. The furnishings in the room were very simple. Aside from a bed and a chair, there was nothing else. Even so, the entire room was clean and spotless. Fourth brother, this is your room. Remember the place well. Don't go to the wrong place. Changyang, who chuckled from the side. Jianqin nodded slightly. After leaving behind a change of clothes, he was dragged by his elder brother Changyang to stroll around the campus. The reason was to let Jianqin familiarize himself with the environment. Following that, for the entire afternoon, Jianqin was dragged around the campus by Changyang Hu. Chapter 13. Hearing this, Jianqin's heart skipped a beat. He asked, "Big brother, is a class 3 monster core very precious?" Although Jianqin knew about monster cores, he was very confused about their price. Of course, a class 3 monster core can be sold for 100 purple crystal coins. In the 4 years since I came to the academy, I have never used a class 3 monster core. At most, I have used a class 2 monster core. Moreover, it cost me 50 purple crystal coins to buy it. Saying this, Changyang, whose face revealed a trace of heartache, Jianqin calculated in his heart. He quickly decided that in the freshman competition tomorrow, he must do his best to obtain a class 3 monster core. Although Jianqin had never used a class 3 monster core, he knew that he could cultivate by absorbing the energy within the monster core. The speed was many times faster than absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Once he obtained a class 3 monster core, he believed that he could quickly reach the 10th stage of Saint Force. When the sky gradually darkened, Jianqin was led by Changyang to the school cafeteria. After eating dinner, The two separated and walked back to their own dormitories. Returning to his dormitory, Jianqin closed the door and sat cross-legged on his bed. Just as he was about to start cultivating, a sudden knocking sound came from the door. Hearing the knocking sound, Jianqin suspiciously looked at the door. He then got off his bed and walked to the door to open it. Outside the door was a woman around 30 years old. She wore a long green dress. Although her appearance could not be considered to be devastatingly beautiful, she was still quite beautiful. Her long, dark green hair casually draped over her shoulders, giving people a feeling of floating in the air. "Is something the matter?" Looking at the woman in confusion, Jianqin opened his mouth to ask, "You must be a new student who has just entered Kargath Academy. Tomorrow, the Academy will be holding a freshman competition. All new students must participate. Remember not to be absent." The woman indifferently looked at Jianqin and said coldly, "And I know. Is there anything else?" Jianqin opened his mouth to ask, "No." After saying this, the woman turned around and left, heading to the next room. It seemed that she had to inform the other students, one by one. After closing the door, Jianqin returned to his bed and sat down cross-legged. He quickly entered a state of cultivation. The next morning, Jianqin finished his cultivation for the night and left his room alone. He went to the cafeteria according to his memory. After getting his breakfast, he found an empty table and started eating. Since it was still early, there were not many people in the cafeteria. There were empty seats everywhere. After eating breakfast, Jianqin walked directly to the sports field in the middle of the school. Today's freshman tournament was being held there. Along the way, Jianqin found that there were many students walking towards the sports field in the middle of the school like him. Because the older students were wearing the school uniform, Jianqin could tell that most of them were new students. There were not many older students. Perhaps some of the older students were not interested in the freshman tournament. When Jianqin approached the sports field, he saw from afar that there were 5 arenas with a diameter of 30 meters built on the sports field. There were already many people surrounding the arenas. Jianqin arrived in front of a large tree that was 100 meters away from the arena. When he was 5 meters away from the tree, he suddenly rushed forward. Then he used the trunk of the tree as leverage and easily jumped onto a branch that was 5 meters high. He leisurely sat on the branch and enjoyed the shade. It was still early and not time for the tournament to begin. Therefore, Jianqin was not in a hurry to run over. That Wu Ning was just basking in the sun. Time quickly passed, and soon it was time for the tournament to begin. At this time, there were already over 1,000 students gathered around the arena. Among them, there were only a few older students who were wearing the school uniform. The rest were all new students. However, Jianqin could tell from the clothes of the new students that more than 90% of them were commoners. They wore simple and crude clothes made of rough cloth. Some of them even had several patches on their clothes. This was not only because commoners in the kingdom of Jessen were more common than nobles, but more importantly, the children who lived in poor areas were able to endure hardships. They were much more hardworking than those who lived in large families. Therefore, the majority of the students who were able to enter Kargath Academy were commoners. In addition to this, Jianqin also noticed that among the new students, the youngest were 16 or 17 years old. There were even some who were in their teens. After all, it was rare to see someone like Jianqin who had reached 80% of holy force at the age of 15. Therefore, among the new students, Jianqin was probably the youngest. Even so, Jianqin's body was far more developed than the average person. Although he was only 15 years old, he looked more like a 16 or 17-year-old boy. Jianqin jumped down from the 5-meter-tall tree and landed lightly on the ground. He then walked towards the arena. When he arrived at the edge of the crowd, Jianqin did not continue to push his way in. Instead, he quietly stood outside. A tournament between a group of children could not pique Jianqin's interest. It did not matter if he watched or not. The only reason he participated in the tournament was for the Class 3 Monster Corps. Everyone quiet down. Suddenly, an abnormally loud voice rang out. The voice was very loud and spread throughout the entire field. Hearing this voice, the surrounding students who were discussing spiritedly immediately quieted down. In an instant, the entire field became silent. Then, a middle-aged man dressed in white walked up to the center of the arena. The middle-aged man had an ordinary appearance and was not eye-catching. However, his eyes were bright and full of expression, as if they were divine weapons. No one dared to look directly at him. The middle-aged man looked around and revealed a pleasant smile on his face. He used a kind tone and said, "Students, I am Kargath Academy's Vice Principal, Bayan. I will personally host today's freshman tournament. As for the rules of the tournament, I believe everyone has seen it from the announcement board at the school gate. I will not say much. The prizes for this year's freshman tournament are the same as usual. The first place of the Freshman King will be rewarded with a Class 3 Monster Corps. The second place will be rewarded with a Class 2 Monster Corps, and the third place will be rewarded with a Class 1 Monster Corps. In addition to these, any student who can enter the top 50 will be rewarded with a purple crystal coin." When they heard the last reward, all of the freshmen wearing commoner clothing cheered loudly. Commoner families like them didn't have a lot of daily expenses, and they ate simple and plain meals. 1 gold coin was enough to sustain their family of 3 for a month's living expenses, and 1 purple crystal coin was equivalent to 100 gold coins, which was enough to sustain their family of 3 for nearly 10 years' living expenses. Although the Monster Corps was even more precious, they did not dare to have extravagant hopes. After all, there were only 3 spots for a Monster Corps. However, the purple crystal coin was worth a total of 50 spots. At this moment, almost all the students who were relatively poor couldn't help but feel their blood boil. They secretly swore in their hearts that, for the sake of this purple crystal coin, they must strive to enter the top 50. Looking at the expressions on the faces of these commoner students, some of the aristocratic students showed disdain in their eyes. Although 1 purple crystal coin was not a small amount in the eyes of commoners, but to these children who lived in aristocratic families, it was simply nothing. And Jianchen had about 50 purple crystal coins on him. The freshman competition began very quickly. The students would draw their own lots. The lots were placed in a large tube and were covered by a piece of paper. It was impossible to see the numbers inside. There were 2 large jars that contained lots. One of the jars was for the students who had reached the 8th layer of Saint Force, and the other was for the students who had reached the 9th layer of Saint Force. This way, they could avoid the possibility of a student at the 8th layer of Saint Force meeting a student at the 9th layer of Saint Force. If that was the case, then there would be no suspense about the outcome. Although the minimum requirement to enter Kargath Academy was to reach the 8th layer of Saint Force, every year, among the freshmen who entered, there was no lack of freshmen who had some talent in cultivation. Or it could be said that there were some people who were nurtured by aristocratic families who had reached the 9th layer of Saint Force. The lot-drawing ceremony quickly proceeded. Very quickly it was Gentian's turn. Looking at the few lots in the large jar, Gentian casually picked one and then took it to a distance and opened the seal. The words 3rd Arena, number 64, were written on it. Looking at this number, Ling Tian already knew that his opponent would be the person who had picked up lot 136 for the 3rd Arena. This was because the opponents for this competition were calculated according to the numbers on the 2 lots, which added up to 200. After receiving the lot, all of the students silently walked towards their respective arenas. Gentian also walked towards the 3rd arena. The competition proceeded very quickly. The first round only took half a day to complete. Because his opponent was only a child who did not know any martial arts, Gentian easily entered the second round. After eating lunch, the freshman competition continued. However, this time, the number of participants was reduced by half. In total, there were about 500 people. The second round was exactly the same as the first round. It was decided by drawing lots. Because the number of participants was reduced by half, the second round only took 8 hours to complete. After the second round ended, there were only 256 participants left. According to this number, it was just enough to smoothly proceed to the next round of drawing lots. There would not be an awkward situation where there was an extra person. Following that, the third round of drawing lots was immediately carried out. After the drawing of lots was completed, the martial arts competition began. Finally, it ended in the evening. At the same time, 128 people successfully advanced, including Jianchen. After leaving the martial arts arena, the sky was almost dark. Jianchen rubbed his stomach that was already protesting and helplessly shook his head. In his previous life, even if he did not eat for several days and nights, he would not feel hungry. But now, as long as he did not eat 3 meals a day, he would feel hungry. This made Jianchen feel quite helpless. Very quickly, Jianchen arrived at the academy's cafeteria. After receiving his things, he found an empty seat in the hall and began to eat. Although the food was simple and could not be compared to the food in Changyang Prefecture, Jianchen still ate with relish. Chapter 14. Bam! Just as Jianchen was eating with relish, a hand suddenly landed heavily on Jianchen's table, causing the entire table to tremble slightly. Jianchen furrowed his eyebrows and slowly raised his head. He saw that the owner of the hand was a 20-year-old noble child. He wore the uniform of the academy, so he should be a senior student of the academy. Behind the youth stood 2 people who looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. One was a boy, and the other was a girl. Their faces were filled with arrogance, and they wore luxurious clothes sewn from silk and satin. Anyone who saw them would know that they were born into a rich family. Looking at the 3 people wearing noble clothing, Jianchen's lips moved slightly, and he slowly spat out a few words. "What's the matter?" His tone was extremely flat. The noble child, who looked about 20 years old, had a fierce look in his eyes, and he looked fiercely at Jianchen. His tone was extremely arrogant as he shouted, "Hey, kid, this table is now ours. Go eat somewhere else." Even though Jianchen's clothing showed that he was not a commoner, the other party still did not put Jianchen in his eyes. Hearing this, Jianchen looked at the boy with disdain and said indifferently, "If you want to eat, then sit down and eat together. This table belongs to the school, and your names are not written on it. When did it become yours?" Hearing this, the noble child's face showed a trace of anger, and he lost his patience. He said loudly, "Are you going to move or not?" Now, the situation at Jianchen's table had attracted the attention of the surrounding students who were eating. Many people looked over, but no one dared to speak up. Jianchen's face showed a trace of a smile. This kind of situation he had encountered many times in his previous life, but he had taught the other party a lesson every time. "Of course I will. Wait until I finish eating." This time, Jianchen did not even look at the other party. He buried his head and ate with relish. Because his mouth was stuffed with food, Jianchen's voice was a bit unclear. Even so, the 3 of them still heard it clearly. "Brother, it seems that your deterrence in the academy isn't that great. You can't even set up a table. You can't let the 2 of us just stand outside and eat." A girl standing behind the youth softly said with a smile. Hearing that, the young man, who seemed to be in his 20s, immediately became embarrassed. However, he immediately became furious. He stared at Jianchen viciously and said furiously, "Brat, what's your name? Which clan are you from? Tell me if you have the balls." Jianchen frowned slightly, but before he could say anything, a voice came from not far away. "Kadiyun, you are a senior student of Kargath Academy. How dare you bully a freshman who just entered this year?" Following the voice, a young man wearing the school uniform, about the same age as the noble child called Kadiyun, slowly walked in. Seeing this young man, the young man called Kadiyun's face changed slightly. His eyes showed a trace of fear. He coldly said, By Moran, it's not up to you to meddle in my affairs. At this time, Jianqin also knew the names of the two people. The one who called him out was called Ka Diun, and the one who appeared to help him was called By Moran. The young man called By Moran chuckled and said, Ka Diun, it's true that it's not up to me to meddle in your affairs. However, as a senior, I have no choice but to meddle in this junior's affairs. Hearing this, the faces of Ka Diun and the two youths standing behind him changed slightly. At this time, the girl standing behind Ka Diun hesitated for a moment, then pulled Ka Diun's clothes and softly said, Brother, there is already an empty seat over there. Let's go sit over there. Hearing this, Ka Diun's eyes subconsciously looked around the cafeteria. Sure enough, he found that there was an empty seat not far away. After fiercely glancing at Jianqin, Ka Diun coldly snorted and waved his hand. Second brother, third sister, let's go eat. After saying that, Ka Diun took the lead and walked towards the empty table. If he continued to be entangled like this, not only would he not get any benefits, but he would also be met with a nose full of dust. Because By Moran was not only not weaker than his Ka Diun family in terms of family matters, but also stronger than him. Of course, this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that Ka Diun, as a senior, actually bullied a new student. If this was spread in the academy, Ka Diun was afraid that he would be ridiculed by many people. If this reached the ears of the headmaster, he would even be severely criticized. The reason why Ka Diun didn't ask the commoner students to give up their seats was because all the seniors in Kargath Academy knew very well that the headmaster of Kargath Academy, one of the 6 masters of the Kingdom of Jessin, was very biased towards these poor students. At this time, Ka Diun's sister's eyes suddenly lit up when she looked at Jianqin, as if she had remembered something. She said, Oh, I remember now. You are this year's new student who successfully advanced to the 128th place. I just happened to see you in the ring. As soon as her voice fell, the girl looked at Jianqin with a somewhat malicious gaze. Hearing this, the youth who had been following the girl who hadn't spoken until now suddenly turned his head and stared straight at Jianqin. He said with a sinister smile, I hope I can meet you in the new student competition tomorrow. After saying that, the youth followed Ka Diun and walked towards the empty table. Jianqin completely ignored the boy's words. He did not take them to heart at all. At this time, By Moran walked in front of Jianqin and patted Jianqin's shoulder. He said with a smile, This junior is really brave. You actually dare to not give Ka Diun any face. If Ka Diun bullies you in the future, you can come directly to me. Hearing this, Jianqin stood up from his chair and smiled faintly. This one is Changyang Shoten. Thank you, senior, for helping me out. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have gotten into some trouble. By Moran chuckled and said, Junior, there's no need to be so polite. Ka Diun is very arrogant in the academy because of his family's power. I've long disliked him. It's a pity that I haven't been able to find an opportunity to teach him a lesson. Right, I'm By Moran. You can just call me Senior By Moran. Junior, you have to be careful in the new student competition tomorrow. The two people following behind Ka Diun are his younger sister Ka Dekialai and his younger brother Ka Diliang. It's said that both of them have reached the 9th layer of Saint Force. Jianqin smiled faintly and said, Senior By Moran, don't worry. Once I meet the two of them, I'll be careful. By Moran nodded slightly and said, It's getting late. I should go back to the dorm. Junior, let's meet again. After separating from By Moran, Jianqin finished the rest of the food quickly and directly returned to his dorm. Jianqin hadn't seen his elder brother Changyang, who for the whole day today. He didn't know where he had run off to. After casually cleaning up the dust in the dorm, Jianqin sat cross-legged on his bed and began his compulsory homework every night, cultivation. The battles on the second day were completed very quickly. As the number of participants decreased with each round, the top 8 were decided on the second day. Ever since the top 50 were decided, The Academy had removed the rule that those at the 8th layer of Saint Force could not fight against those at the 9th layer of Saint Force, allowing the freshmen to fight freely. As a result, in the top 8 aside from Jian Qin and another boy with darker skin who was at the 8th layer of Saint Force, the other 6 freshmen had all reached the 9th layer of Saint Force, allowing them to advance to the top 8. Whether it was Jian Qin or the dark-skinned boy, both of them had defeated a few freshmen at the 9th layer of Saint Force. Other than these, what surprised Jian Qin was that among the 6 students who had reached the 9th layer of Saint Force, there was also the brother and sister, Ka Di Chili and Ka Di Liang, who he had a conflict with in the cafeteria yesterday. Although he didn't meet the brother and sister in the arena, Jian Qin noticed more than once that the brother and sister looked at him with eyes full of provocation. Jian Qin didn't care about the brother and sister's provocative gazes at all. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of the dark-skinned boy who had advanced to the top 8 with 8th layer Saint Force. Jian Qin had also seen the boy's fighting style clearly. He felt that the boy was a little unusual, as if he was born with divine strength. The reason why he was able to advance to the top 8 so smoothly was naturally because of his strength that far exceeded his peers. Almost half of the new students who fought with him were directly thrown out by him. The final few battles were arranged by the school to be held tomorrow, and at the same time, the newcomer king of this year's freshman tournament would also be decided tomorrow. After leaving the field, Jian Qin went straight to the cafeteria. After receiving his meal, he inadvertently saw the dark-skinned boy who had entered the top 8 in the freshman tournament, sitting in a corner and eating alone. The boy was wearing simple cloth clothes with several patches sewn on it. It was obvious that he was a child born in a commoner family. Although the boy looked to be only 16 or 17 years old, Jian Qin could see a trace of resoluteness on his youthful face. Moreover, his body didn't match his age at all. He was already 8 meters tall, and his size was even bigger than Jian Qin's big brother, Changyang Hu. Jian Qin hesitated for a moment before carrying his meal to the boy's table and sitting down. After putting down his meal, Jian Qin turned to look at the boy beside him and smiled. "My name is Changyang Shoten. How should I address you?" Hearing this, the boy raised his head and looked at Jian Qin. His eyes swept over Jian Qin's clothes and said, "My name is Tai Ta." Jian Qin smiled faintly and said, "I just saw Tai Ta's battle in the arena. Tai Ta was able to defeat a 9th layer Saint Force freshman with 80% Saint Force. That's really amazing." Chapter 15. Jian Qin's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He asked again, "Tai Ta, how strong are you now? For example, how much can you lift?" "Back when I was at home, I could lift a boulder that weighed over 400 kilograms, Tai Ta said rather proudly. His face was filled with pride when he said that. Jian Qin could not help but be stunned when he heard that answer. He looked at Tai Ta with a strange gaze. Even a normal adult would not be able to lift a boulder that weighed over 400 kilograms. Jian Qin found it unbelievable that Tai Ta could lift a boulder that weighed over 400 kilograms at such a young age. "Tai Ta, how old are you this year?" Jian Qin looked at Tai Ta in a different light now. 16 years old. Tai Ta mumbled as he chewed on the food in his mouth. Jian Qin looked at Tai Ta in a different light again. He asked, "Tai Ta, have you always been this strong since you were young?" "Yeah, I've always been stronger than others since I was young. However, I also ate more than others. Back when I was at home, I often didn't have enough to eat, so I often went into the mountains alone to hunt and roast the food myself." Tai Ta's tone was very calm. Jian Qin took a deep breath. He was now certain that Tai Ta was born with great strength. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to lift a boulder that weighed over 400 kilograms at such a young age. What shocked Jian Qin even more was that Tai Ta often went into the mountains alone to hunt. Jian Qin could not help but think more highly of Tai Ta when he was only 16 years old. After all, not only were there wild beasts in the mountains, there would also be 1 or 2 magical beasts that would occasionally appear. The strength of magical beasts was not something that wild beasts could compare to. At this moment, Taita rubbed his stomach in satisfaction. He stood up from the stool and chuckled at Jianqin. "Changyang Shoten, I'm full. I'm going back to my dorm to rest. There's still a competition tomorrow." Jianqin nodded with a smile. "I hope you can make it into the top 3 in the finals tomorrow." Taita nodded firmly. His eyes were filled with determination. He said, "I will definitely work hard and try to make it into the top 3. A Class 1 monster core can usually be sold for 10 purple coins." Not long after Taita left, Jianqin hurriedly finished his dinner and returned to his dorm. Just as he closed the door, there was a sudden knock on the door. "Fourth brother, are you there?" Changyang, whose voice sounded from outside. Jianqin was slightly stunned when he heard that. He never thought that it would be his elder brother who had disappeared for 2 whole days. Jianqin immediately opened the door and called Changyang Hu. "Fourth brother, did you successfully advance in the new student competition?" Changyang Hu looked at Jianqin as soon as he entered the room. He couldn't wait to ask. Jianqin nodded slightly. "I've already advanced to the top 8. Tomorrow is the final battle." Changyang, whose face immediately lit up with joy when he heard that. He said excitedly, "Fourth brother, you're really amazing. No wonder you came to Kargath Academy earlier than second sister and third brother." Saying that, Changyang, who took out a thumb-sized crystal and stuffed it into Jianqin's hand. He said, "Fourth brother, this is a Class 1 monster core. I got it from killing a Class 1 monster beast in the forest behind the academy with a few friends. Big brother specially prepared it for you. Take it and use it. All right, it's getting late. Big brother won't disturb you any longer. Tomorrow is the final battle. Fourth brother, you must work hard and try to get first place." After he finished speaking, Changyang, who turned and walked out of the room, gently closing the door behind him. The moment Changyang, who closed the door, Jianqin's eyes inadvertently caught sight of a 3-inch long wound on Changyang, whose right arm. Silently looking at the Class 1 monster core in his hand, he could feel the lingering warmth from it. For a moment, Jianqin found it hard to calm down. Although it was only a Class 1 monster core, Jianqin could clearly feel his big brother Changyang, whose concern for him from this monster core. Looking at the wound on Changyang, whose arm when he left, Jianqin didn't need to think to know that it was from hunting a monster beast. Thinking of this, Jianqin couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. Suddenly, an emotion that had never appeared in his previous life appeared in his heart. After standing blankly in the room for a moment, Jianqin finally took in a long breath and gradually calmed himself down. Then he directly went to the bed and sat down cross-legged, continuing to cultivate. As for the Class 1 monster core, Jianqin didn't use it. Instead, he placed it in his spatial belt. With regards to tomorrow's battle, Jianqin had strong confidence that he would be able to obtain first place. After all, in his previous life, he was a peerless expert who stood at the pinnacle of the world. Although he lost his powerful cultivation after reincarnation, the various sword techniques that he grasped, as well as his attainments in the way of the sword, had already been deeply imprinted into the depths of his soul. These were not lost. These would be the strong capital that Jianqin would have in the future when he moved unhindered across the continent. Early the next morning, Jianqin immediately went to the location of the martial arts competition after eating breakfast. Perhaps it was because the final victor would be decided today, so there were a lot more spectators than the previous 2 days. The extra spectators were almost all the older students of the academy. The martial arts arenas on the field had been adjusted last night. From the original 5 arenas, there were now 4 arenas. Not only was the area larger than the previous arenas, but the hardness of the arenas was also incomparable to yesterday's arenas. Right at this moment, Jianqin seemed to have felt something. He slightly turned his head and saw his big brother, Changyang Hu, trying his best to push through the crowd and walk towards him. Noticing Jianqin's gaze, Changyang Hu grinned. He quickly pushed aside the people in front of him and came to Jianshin's side. He reached out his hand and patted Jianshin's shoulder. He chuckled and said, "Fourth brother, you must work hard today. Big brother doesn't expect you to obtain first place. As long as you can enter the top 3, that's enough." For Changyang, who, the monster core reward from the competition was only a small matter. The most important thing was the ranking. Although Class 1 monster cores were expensive, they weren't in the eyes of the young masters of Changyang Prefecture. Jianshin smiled and said, "Big brother, you can rest assured. I will definitely not disappoint you." Soon, it was time for the competition. This time, the top 4 would be chosen from the top 8. After drawing lots to choose their opponents, Jianshin immediately went up the stage. Not long after, his opponent also slowly walked up the stage. However, what surprised Jianshin was that his opponent was actually a girl. To be precise, it was the girl who had a conflict with him before, Kadikili. Kadikili was wearing a dark red outfit. Although she was only 16 or 17 years old, her body had developed very well. She had curves in all the right places and was slim in all the right places. The tight-fitting outfit perfectly outlined her slender figure that belonged to a woman. Coupled with her naturally beautiful face and tender skin, she had the capital to move the hearts of ordinary men. There was no doubt that Kadikili would become a great beauty that could cause the downfall of a country in the future. However, perhaps because she was born in a large family, there was always a trace of arrogance between her brows. Jianshin stood on the stage with his bare hands. The reason why there was a freshman competition was because Kargath Academy wanted to distinguish the potential of each freshman through this format. Therefore, the competition didn't allow the use of weapons at all. Moreover, before reaching the strength of a saint, it was impossible to condense a saint weapon in one's body. Therefore, all the freshmen fought with their fists and feet. Kadikili looked at Jianshin with a trace of arrogance in her eyes and said, "You really didn't disappoint us. Weren't you very arrogant that day in the cafeteria? Today, let me teach you a good lesson." Kadikili's voice was very clear and pleasant. Hearing this, Jianshin's face showed a disdainful sneer. These people who were born in noble families always had an exaggerated opinion of the immensity of heaven and earth. Dong! Along with the loud sound of the bell, it also officially signaled the start of the competition. Because there were a total of 4 stages, the competition this time was 8 people in 4 stages at the same time. With the sound of the bell, all the students in the 4 stages moved at the same time. Kadikili quickly ran towards Jianshin, but when she was only 3 meters away from Jianshin, she suddenly jumped from the ground and kicked towards Jianshin's face. Although Kadikili was only 16 or 17 years old, her skills were not weak. The saint force in her body had already reached the 9th level. Jianshin stood in place without moving. His face was calm. Just when Kadikili's kick was close to his face, Jianshin's neck slightly twisted and his head tilted, just in time to avoid Kadikili's kick. Kadikili's reaction was also very fast. Seeing that her kick did not hit the target, she clenched her hand into a fist and directly punched towards Jianshin's nose. Because of the 9th level of saint force in her body, Kadikili's punch was not only very fast, but also contained a powerful force. Even if it hit a normal adult, it would be able to injure them. Against Jianshin, Kadikili did not hold back at all. Whether it was to defeat Jianshin and advance to the top 4, or to teach Jianshin a lesson, she did not allow herself to hold back at all. Jianshin easily dealt with Kadikili's attacks. Although his saint force was 1 level lower than her, Jianshin was not an ordinary child after all. He had rich battle experience from his previous life. As long as he was willing, even if he did not fight back, he could make Kadikili's attacks unable to even touch his clothes and defeat her within 5 rounds. After a few dozen attacks, Kadikili still could not even touch Jianshin's clothes. This not only made her very angry, but she also stopped her attacks. After taking a few breaths, Kadikili put her hands on her hips and angrily stared at Jianchen. She angrily said, "Hey, are you going to fight or not? If you're not going to fight, then get out of the ring. Don't jump around here." Jianchen looked at the angry Kadikili with a funny expression and said indifferently, "The one who should be getting out of the ring is you, not me. You can't even touch me. So how are you going to beat me? You." Kadikili's beautiful face was red with anger. She pointed her finger at Jianchen and was speechless. But then she rolled her eyes and sneered, "So what if I can't touch you? You still don't dare to fight me head-on and can only hide there. What a coward." "Oh, is that so?" Jianchen had a strange smile on his face and looked at Kadikili with a strange gaze. Kadikili proudly looked at Jianchen and said confidently, "Of course it is. Otherwise, you can fight me properly." Chapter 16. Hearing Jianchen's words, Kadikili's eyes lit up. "That's what you said. Don't dodge." Kadikili clearly did not want to give Jianchen time to prepare. Before she even finished speaking, she had already charged towards Jianchen. When she approached Jianchen, she leapt into the air and sent a kick towards Jianchen's face. However, this time, the speed of her kick was much faster than before. A strange smile appeared on Jianchen's face. Facing Kadikili's kick, he did not dodge at all. Just as Kadikili's kick was about to land on his face, Jianchen quickly extended his hands and firmly grabbed onto Kadikili's calf. Afterwards, he exerted force with both hands, twisted his waist, and changed his footsteps, quickly forming a circle. This series of actions was done in one go. Afterwards, Jianchen actually grabbed onto one of Kadikili's legs and swung her around in the air amidst her panicked cries of surprise. Jianchen's actions stunned many students below the stage. This was not only because Jianchen did not have the slightest protective feelings for the fairer sex and actually swung such a cute girl in the air without a care for her image, but more because they were shocked by how easily Jianchen had defeated a 6th-layer Saint Force opponent. Below the stage, the veins on Kadikili's forehead bulged as he watched his little sister being abused by Jianchen. His face became extremely gloomy, and his gaze towards Jianchen was filled with killing intent. If it were not for the fact that Vice Principal by N was presiding over the match, he probably would have already charged onto the stage to teach Jianchen a lesson. Jianchen's hands were like a pair of strong pliers as he tried to hold onto Kadikili's calf. He spun her around twice in the air before letting go. Immediately, Kadikili's petite body was sent flying off the stage in a perfect trajectory, smashing into a group of people. This move was something that Jianchen had learned from Taita. He had watched Taita's matches a few times and discovered that almost half of Taita's opponents had been thrown off the stage by him using the same method. However, Jianchen had to admit that this was indeed a good method to easily win, especially when used on certain people. Jianchen looked at Kadikili with a bit of disdain as he stood up again with the support of the crowd. Jianchen sneered, and only after the referee announced his victory did he walk down the stage unhurriedly, staring blankly at Jianchen, who had already walked off the stage. Kadikili's gaze was a bit sluggish. Since young, she had grown up under the care of tens of thousands of people. She had never been humiliated like this before. She was actually grabbed by someone and spun in the air a few times before being mercilessly thrown off the stage. Although she did not suffer any serious injuries, the loss of face made her feel very wronged. Thinking about how to live, a trace of mist gradually appeared in Kadikili's eyes. In the end, 2 clear lines of tears flowed out of her eyes as she actually cried silently. Just as Jianchen walked off the stage, Kadikili's brother, Kadian, stood in front of Jianchen. He stared sharply at Jianchen and said in a deep voice, "Brat, you really have fucking guts, daring to treat my sister like this." Jianchen looked indifferently at the angry Kadian and sneered. He did not say anything and directly left. In Jianchen's view, talking to him was a waste of time. This was because he disliked people like Kadian who relied on their family's influence to bully others. Looking at Jianshan's gradually disappearing back, Ka Dian's expression became more and more gloomy. Not long after Jianshan's match ended, the list of the top 4 was released. They were Changyang Shodan, Tai Ta, Ka Diliang, and Tian Muxiong. Jianshan was not surprised that Tai Ta could enter the top 10, but Ka Diliang could also enter the top 4. This made Jianshan feel a little surprised. The 4th to enter the top 4 was Tian Muxiong. He was a boy about the same age as Kadichili. He had a medium build and a pale face. Although he was only 16 or 17 years old, he didn't have the slightest trace of a handsome face and perfect facial features. Kargith Academy's vice principal, by N, who was sitting on the platform, slowly swept his gaze over Jianshan's group of 4. He nodded with a smile and muttered, "It seems that this year's new students are much stronger than the previous years. I really hope that my Kargith Academy can also produce a powerhouse." After the top 4 were decided, there was a 2-hour break before the competition continued. But coincidentally, Jianshan's opponent this time was Ka Diliang, while Tai Ta's opponent was Tian Muxiong. Below the stage, Ka Diyun and his sister were gathered together. Currently, Ka Dichili's eyes were slightly red and swollen. "Second brother, you must properly teach him a lesson." Ka Dichili's eyes were filled with raging flames as she hatefully said to Ka Diliang. Looking at Ka Dichili's red and swollen eyes and the dried tear stains on her face, Ka Diliang's eyes could not help but show a trace of extreme anger. He firmly said, "Little sister Chili, don't worry. Even if I am punished by the academy, second brother will definitely help you teach him a lesson." "Humph, this arrogant brat actually dares to treat my little sister like this. He really doesn't want to live. Little sister, don't worry. I promise you that this brat will have a very painful time in the academy. Although the principal is very biased towards commoners, this brat is not a commoner. Even if I cripple him, the principal will not say anything. At most, he will only criticize us." Ka Diyun's eyes flashed with a trace of resentment. Ka Diyun and Ka Diliang were very concerned about their little sister. Jianshan's bullying of their little sister had already made the 2 of them hate Jianshan to the bone. Soon, Jianshan and Ka Diliang both appeared on the stage. Just as the bell that signaled the start of the competition rang, Ka Diliang's figure suddenly rushed forward. He quickly rushed towards Jianshan and directly threw a punch at Jianshan. Jianshan nimbly dodged Ka Diliang's attack. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind Ka Diliang and also threw a punch at Ka Diliang. His speed was very fast. Bam! Before Ka Diliang could react, Jianshan's fist had already fiercely hit Ka Diliang's back. The strong impact from the fist made Ka Diliang stagger a few steps forward. He almost lost his balance and fell to the ground. After the punch, Jianshan's movements did not stop at all. His feet continuously moved and quickly arrived in front of Ka Diliang. Before Ka Diliang could stand up, Jianshan directly kicked his butt. Suddenly, Ka Diliang could no longer control his unstable body. His body leaped forward and landed on the ground almost 2 meters away. However, when he stopped, Ka Diliang was already at the edge of the ring. Moreover, half of his body was already outside the ring. Seeing this scene, the students who were paying attention to Jianshan's stage all cried out in surprise. None of them had thought that in just 1 round, the victor would be decided. What made them even more incredulous was that Ka Diliang, who had a 9th level Saint Force, was actually defeated so easily by Jianshan, who only had an 8th level Saint Force. Seeing half of Ka Diliang's body fall out of the stage, Ka Dichili and Ka Diyun, who were below the stage, felt their hearts in their throats. Sigh, how could second brother be so careless? This is really something. He better not lose to that kid. Ka Dichili angrily stomped his foot and frowned as he muttered to himself anxiously. His eyes were filled with worry as he looked at Ka Diliang. Ka Diyun sighed in annoyance. What is second brother doing? How could he be so careless and be beaten up like this by someone who only has an 8th level Saint Force. On the platform, Vice Principal by N gradually revealed a happy smile as he muttered, "I really did pick up a treasure among the new students this time. One has innate divine strength, while the other is even more unfathomable. Although his attacks are simple, there is a hidden mystery behind them. He can always make the most accurate response at the most crucial moment. If the two of them are properly nurtured, I believe that in the near future they will definitely become famous experts in the Tianyuan continent. Looks like I'll have to properly discuss this matter with the principal." On the stage, Ka Diliang climbed up from the stage. His forehead was now covered in cold sweat. If his body had slid forward just a little bit more, he definitely would have lost his balance and fallen off the stage. If he really lost to an opponent who only had an 8th level Saint Force, and lost in such an ugly manner, it would definitely be a great humiliation to him. Just as Ka Diliang climbed up from the ground and turned around, he suddenly felt his vision blur. Before he could understand what was going on, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. After that, he felt his body become light and the stage became smaller and smaller in his eyes. Finally, he fell to the ground with a loud bang. On his pure white clothes, there was an additional footprint on his chest. Standing up from the ground in a daze, Ka Diliang looked around and immediately reacted. His eyes were suddenly filled with anger as he looked at Jianqin with a gaze full of hatred. He was a 9th level Saint Force cultivator, yet he was defeated by an opponent who was only at the 8th level Saint Force. Furthermore, he had been defeated in such a wasteful manner. Thinking of this, Ka Diliang's heart was filled with boundless rage. To him, this was an absolute humiliation. Ka Di-yin arrived in front of Ka Diliang and angrily said, "Second brother, I'm very disappointed in you. You've really lost face for our Ka Di clan." After saying this, Ka Di-yin didn't even look at Ka Diliang as he directly left. Hearing Ka Di-yin's words, Ka Diliang's face became extremely ugly. "Second brother, you were too careless. You said that you would help me teach him a lesson, but in the end, you were taught a lesson by him." Ka Di-chili looked in front of Ka Di-yin and said with a tone full of resentment. Hearing this, Ka Di-yin's face changed again, and he said in a deep voice, this was only because he was lucky and he only won because of the advantage of the stage. If it was another place, he definitely wouldn't be my opponent. "Thoid sister, don't worry. I'll definitely teach him a lesson in the future." Hearing this, Ka Di-chili lowered her head and thought about it. She also felt that Ka Diliang's words were very reasonable, so she nodded slightly and said, "Second brother, next time you must teach him a lesson." Ka Diliang patted his chest and said solemnly, "Don't worry. Third sister, leave this matter to me." Chapter 17. After resting for 2 hours, the final match finally began. Jianchen and Tai Ta walked onto the stage at the same time, standing 10 meters apart from each other. Around the stage, there were already more than 1,000 students surrounding it, making it impossible for even a drop of water to leak out. Jianchen looked at Tai Ta with a faint smile on his face. He praised, "Tai Ta, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. You actually made it to the final match." Hearing Jianchen's praise, Tai Ta's face turned slightly red, revealing a trace of embarrassment. Even so, the excitement on his face was clearly seen by Jianchen. With a simple and honest smile, Tai Ta said in a low, muffled voice, "Changyang Shoten, you're also very powerful." Jianchen stretched his arms and legs, smiling faintly. "Tai Ta, this is the last battle. This time, the newcomer king will be decided between the two of us. This time, you have to use your full strength. Defeat me, and you'll be the newcomer king. At that time, you'll obtain a Class 3 monster core that's worth at least a few hundred purple gold. It'll be enough for your parents to live on for the rest of their lives." Hearing this, Tai Ta's eyes burned with passion. He fiercely nodded and said, "Changyang Shoten, I'll definitely use my full strength. You must be careful." Jianchen slightly nodded and said with a smile, "I'm not that easy to defeat." Boom! At this time, the bell that signaled the start of the match suddenly rang. The moment the bell rang, Taita also took a step forward, quickly rushing towards Jianchen. However, when he arrived in front of Jianchen, Taita quickly stretched out his hands towards Jianchen, intending to use his innate divine strength to lift Jianchen's body up. He would then throw the stage down. Jianchen smiled. He was already familiar with Taita's move. In the previous matches, Taita had always used this move. Once caught by him, it would be very difficult to break free. Jianchen stepped back slightly, easily dodging Taita's hands. He then clenched his right hand into a fist and used 80% of his strength to punch Taita's chest. Jianchen's punch was extremely fast, and he grasped the timing very well. Taita had no time to dodge. Bang! With a muffled sound, Jianchen's fist landed solidly on Taita's chest. However, in the next moment, Jianchen's expression changed slightly. He looked at Taita with a sliver of surprise. He realized that his punch did not seem to have landed on a person, but an extremely tough wall. Taita's body was extremely tough, so tough that it was a little illogical. Jianchen's powerful punch caused Taita to stumble back a few steps, but he quickly regained his footing. He roared angrily and charged towards Jianchen again. He raised his fist and punched towards Jianchen's chest. Jianchen's punch, which contained 80% of his strength, did not injure him at all. A trace of excitement gradually appeared on Jianchen's face. Looking at Taita's fist, he did not dodge. Instead, he punched back with all his strength. The two fists fiercely collided in midair, exploding with a muffled sound. Even the students below the stage could hear it clearly. The two fists separated as soon as they made contact. Jianchen could not help but quickly retreat. He only stopped after retreating a full 10 meters. At this moment, his right hand was already trembling slightly. Obviously, Jianchen had suffered quite a bit in the clash with Taita. Even with his body that had been tempered by saint force and far surpassed his peers, it was still a little difficult for him to endure. On the other hand, Taita had only taken 2 steps back. His expression was normal, as if he had not been injured at all. Jianchen rubbed his slightly swollen right hand. After these 2 clashes, he already understood that it was not a wise choice to clash with Taita head-on. Not only was Taita's strength frightening, his body was also unbelievably tough. If they were to clash head-on, perhaps even those who were a level higher than Taita would not be his match. The only way to win was by relying on speed. Taita, your strength has already exceeded my expectations. I'm going to use my full strength now. Jianchen slowly walked forward and said with a faint smile. Taita chuckled. Come, Changyang Shoten. You won't be able to hurt me. Taita's voice was filled with confidence. Jianchen did not waste any more words. When he was only 5 or 6 meters away from Taita, his footsteps suddenly changed. His feet moved in a mysterious and strange manner on the stage. His body quickly swayed left and right, suddenly arriving behind Taita. Before Taita could even react, his fists had already landed on Taita's back. Dong! 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 Muffled sounds constantly rang out from the stage. They were so dense that they seemed to form a straight line. Under the powerful impact, Taita's body uncontrollably charged forward. He did not have the time to turn around. Taita roared and tried his best to stabilize his body. Then he quickly turned around and swung his fists at Jianchen behind him. Just as Taita's fists were about to hit, Jianchen's body lightly leaped 2 meters high and dodged Taita's fists. Then, in the air, Jianchen continuously kicked Taita with his legs. Every kick carried a powerful force. The powerful impact caused Taita to continuously retreat. Dong! 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 Jianchen kicked more than 10 times in a row before landing on the ground. At this time, Taita's face was already covered in bruises from Jianshin's kicks. After landing on the ground, Jianshin did not stop moving. He spun on the spot and bent his legs downward. His right leg was close to the ground as it rotated 180 degrees, sweeping at Taita's legs at an extremely fast speed. Pum! Taita directly somersaulted into the arena. However, he immediately got up and rushed at Jianshin with a roar. Jianshin and Taita once again fought fiercely. Because of Taita's innate strength and the strength of his body, Jianshin already understood that if he were to use force against Taita, it would be very unwise. Therefore, in the following battle, Jianshin completely relied on his advantage in agility to fight Taita. Although Taita's body was very strong, Jianshin's multiple attacks stacked on the same part of Taita's body made Taita extremely uncomfortable. He was in so much pain that he grimaced. What followed was a one-sided battle. Jianshin relied on his speed and combat experience from his previous life to beat Taita, who had the upper hand, until he could only run away. Although Taita would occasionally find the time to counterattack, his attacks could not hit Jianshin at all. He could not even touch the corner of Jianshin's clothes. This scene greatly surprised the spectating students below the arena. Whether it was Jianshin's movement or the speed of his attacks, they were all far beyond the average person. The thousands of students below the arena watched with great interest. It was an eye-opener. On the rostrum, Bai En also looked at Jianshin with admiration. He muttered, "This kid is not simple. He has such rich combat experience, and his speed is not slow either. I think his name is Changyang Shoten. Judging from his name, he seems to be from Changyang Prefecture in Lore City. Looks like I'll have to report this to the dean later." The battle in the arena continued for a while. Taita finally could not take it anymore. He shouted, "Stop, stop! I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to fight anymore. I admit defeat." Jianshin stopped chasing Taita. He looked at Taita with a smile and asked, "Why don't you want to fight anymore?" Taita rubbed the parts of his body that were already red and swollen from Jianshin's attacks. He looked at him with a pitiful expression and said gloomily, "You are too fast. I can't even see clearly. I can't hit you at all. You're the one who's hitting me." Jianshin smiled and said, "Are you going to give up on first place just like that?" Although Jianshin did not hold back, Taita's skin was thick and his body was very strong. He did not receive much damage at all. Taita nodded and said in a low, muffled voice, "I can't beat you. I don't want first place. Second place is not bad either. A second-level demon core can be sold for a lot of money." Afterwards, the two of them left the stage. As for the third spot, it was decided between Ka Diliang and Tianmu Xiong. After a series of battles between the two of them, Tianmu Xiong won in the end and obtained the third spot. After the top three were decided, Jianshin was called to the platform. Vice Principal Bai En came before Jianshin and looked at Jianshin with praise. He then looked away and looked at the 1,000 students below the platform. He said in a clear voice, "Students, this year's new student competition has officially come to an end. I now announce that the title of new student king of this year's new student competition will be won by student Changyang Shoten, who has reached the 8th level of Saint Force." Just as Vice Principal Bai En finished speaking, a loud applause came from below the stage. However, when they heard that the new student king was only at the 8th level of Saint Force, many of the new students who had reached the 9th level of Saint Force felt a wave of unwillingness. However, that was all. After all, they had all seen Jianshin's strength. In front of his speed that dazzled their eyes, it was very difficult for them to dodge. The new students this year are really too useless. In front of so many people with 9th level Saint Force, the title of new student king was actually won by a brat with only 8th level Saint Force. What a disgrace. That's right. The new students today are really too useless. Not only is the newcomer king at the 8th level of Saint Force, I heard that the dark-skinned kid in second place is also at the 8th level of Saint Force. I really don't know what the new students at the 9th level of St. Force are for. 2 seniors wearing the Academy's uniform stood in the crowd and discussed. Their tone was full of ridicule for the new students who had reached the 6th level of St. Force. Hearing their words, one of the seniors standing not far from them said, "You can't say that. In fact, it's not that the new students with 9th level St. Force are weak. It's just that the 2 new students with 8th level St. Force are too strong. That 2nd place brat with dark skin is terrifyingly strong. Didn't you see that several 9th level St. Force freshmen were directly thrown off the stage by him? If it were us, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to do that. As for the new student who got 1st place, his strength is even more terrifying. Didn't you notice that whether it's his dodging speed or his attacking speed, it's extremely fast? I'm afraid that even if we went up, it would be very difficult for us to dodge." Aside from the few of them, there were many older students who were discussing amongst themselves. They had all been in the Academy for a few years now and were very surprised by the final results of this year's freshman tournament. This time, many of the freshmen had reached the 9th layer of St. Force, but they did not expect that among the top 3, 2 of them were freshmen who only had the 8th layer of St. Force. After that, on the platform, Jianqin also received a Class 3 Monster Core as a reward. This Class 3 Monster Core was dark red in color and was slightly larger than the Class 1 Monster Core given to him by his elder brother, Changyang-hu. Holding it in his hand, Jianqin could clearly feel a powerful energy hidden within this Monster Core. This powerful energy was insignificant compared to the qi he had in his previous life, but to the current Jianqin, this energy was extremely large. Other than this Monster Core, Jianqin also received a medal. This medal was completely made of gold and had a strange pattern engraved on it.